If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Forests and woods people. What creepy, scary human or freaky cult encounters have you had deep in the woods and on trails?
My friend and I were followed in the forest by a creepy laughing woman. I'll preface the story by saying we were 12/13 at the time, and my friend and I often snuck out of either of our houses during sleepovers for late night walks. This was the basis of this terrifying encounter, and it stopped us from ever sneaking out after dark again. My friend lived opposite a huge forest, so her house was the preferred choice to sneak out of for us to roam around at night, because the forest was more scary and thrilling, and we always took flashlights, food, and blankets so we could camp out for a couple of hours before going back home again. Well, on this fateful night we inadvertently fell asleep instead of staying awake, so when my friend suddenly jolted me from sleep, it was past 3 a.m., a lot later than we usually snuck out. We grabbed our essentials and crept out of the back door into the cold and dark night. Frost crunched underfoot as we crossed the deserted road, and as we reached the entrance to the forest, we noticed how pitch black and completely silent it was. Unnervingly so. We turned on our torches and stepped onto the uneven path into the forest, the light illuminating the trees swaying in the icy wind. We stepped on fallen sodden leaves and bark as we made an unsteady but familiar way into our favorite part of the forest, our cold breath the only noise to invade the deafening silence. We reached the small hut we constructed one afternoon, made entirely of sticks purely for the purpose of having some shelter for our campouts. There were times that vandals or other kids damaged our hut, but for the most part it stayed intact, but on this occasion it was completely destroyed. Like a harbinger of worse to come. We were just deciding to just call it a night and come back later on that day to repair the hut when we heard it. This loud shrieking giggle made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My friend and I jumped in shock and looked at each other like, WTF? We were completely freaked out. The eerie and unnatural giggle rang out again, contradicting the silence and making my body break out in goosebumps. Someone is in here, my friend whispered to me, looking utterly terrified. We have to go now. Her voice of rationale made it even more scary and unnerving to me that someone was in the forest with us at 3 o'clock in the morning. We just looked at each other in assent and took off running in unison, our footsteps navigating the path as naturally as we could from muscle memory, our uneven gasps of air punctuating the giggling that seemed to be following us, getting closer and closer. Our torches' light went up and down with our fast movements, illuminating random patches of the trees and bushes as we finally saw a small sliver of light as we came to the forest entrance. Running out of the forest, we didn't stop until we reached the back door of my friend's house and almost collapsed in a breathless heap of relief to be safe. Then my friend's eyes went wide, and she nudged me, pointing a shaky finger across the road. A haggard woman of indeterminate age was standing at the forest entrance giggling that awful, horrifying giggle and was waving over at us. We screamed and ran inside and looked out of my friend's bedroom window through the smallest gap in the curtain and could still see the woman standing there. Worse yet, she was staring right at us as if she knew we were there. We could tell she was still giggling that hideous, appalling laugh. She turned very slowly and walked back into the forest again. We never went back to that forest, nor did we go out after dark again. I've had many over the years, but this one was probably the strangest. About 25 years ago when I was 15, I spent the night over at a friend's house. We weren't the best kids at the time, so we smoked cigarettes, which we stole from various stores. That night we waited for his parents to fall asleep so we could sneak out and smoke a cigarette. My friend lived in this small neighborhood that butted up against a patch of woods. Not a large forest by any means, it was a patch about 3 or 4 miles square. But we knew every inch of it, as we had been friends since childhood and explored these woods all the time. So after successfully sneaking out, we were both standing at the end of his driveway around 1 or 2 in the morning having a cigarette. Then we start to hear screaming. Horrific, terrifying screams. And they are coming from the woods across the street. So we look at each other and decide to break every horror movie rule in the book and go check it out. Like I said, we know these woods and had no problem navigating them in the dark. Plus it was a cloudless night, so the moon gave us all the light we needed. So we head into the forest toward the sound of screaming. We get maybe a quarter mile in when we see a light coming through the trees, far off in the distance. So we continue to be idiots and head towards the light. As we get closer, the screams are getting louder, and we can make out the source of the light. It's coming from a small rundown cabin about 50 yards ahead of us. Once again, we know these woods. There was no cabin in those woods. So we creep forward, and we can tell the screaming is definitely coming from inside the cabin. We get about 50 feet away when simultaneously the screaming stops and the lights in the cabin go out. The screaming wasn't choked off or dwindled away, it was as if someone hit the stop button on a tape. So we look at each other, and in the moonlight we can see the absolute terror in each other's eyes. Neither one of us had to say anything. The look in our eyes alone said, "Let's get the duck out of here." So that's exactly what we did. We hastily backtracked and made it back to his house, where we spent most of the night discussing what we had just seen and heard, second-guessing each other about how we'd explored those woods for years and maybe had somehow never found that cabin. Eventually the sun came up, and we pretty much immediately went back to those woods in the safety of daylight. We went right back to where we saw the cabin. You can probably guess what we found. Nothing. No cabin. There is no evidence a cabin even existed there at one point. Nothing but trees. After 25 years, my friend and I still talk about what we saw and heard that night every now and again. Possible cult in the Oregon woods. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and was an avid hiker. In 2013, a group of friends invited me to go mushroom hunting in the Shuswap National Forest, about an hour outside of Portland, where we lived. We spent significant time in the coastal forests, but mushrooms tended to cluster in areas with lighter foliage cover. Our de facto expert had experience foraging off of old logging roads and suggested a spot he visited the year prior. We drove to the end of a one-lane dirt road overlooking a deep ravine. Each of us put on our gear and bushwhacked through the, comparatively sparse, undergrowth, checking the leaves and debris for fungi. After about 20 minutes, I came across a small clearing of trees, perhaps a one-time campsite for loggers. About halfway across the expanse, I noticed something pink on the ground ahead. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. Resting on the leaves was the heart of an unknown animal, roughly the size of my fist, still untouched by the elements and fauna. There was no trace of a body in the immediate area, no other organs, remnants of flesh, or visible blood. It was spotless. The heart had no bite marks, and the tissue was still dark red. I ran like hell back to the car. Mercifully, my friend decided to hang back. We rounded everyone up and left immediately. I have a photograph of the heart, although I wish I had taken one of the clearing. Please let me know if you have any explanations for this. It happened around the Mount Hebo area. A cult ritual occurred in the woods of southwestern Pennsylvania. The incident did not happen to me, but I live in the area where it occurred. As far as I know, this is not a made-up story. My friend and I were discussing the scary things we've seen in the woods, and he told me a story that happened to his friend. So this guy was with 5 of his friends, and they were spending a few days in a cabin hunting and trapping. They were not drunk but had a few beers to unwind one night. So one of them goes out to the outhouse to go to the bathroom, and he swears that off into the woods he hears the faint sound of a drum beating. So he finishes in the outhouse and goes into the cabin and tells his friends to come check out this sound. So they all grab their rifles and walk out the ridge their cabin was on and down the hollow behind it and back up the other side. It was a pretty rocky area, so the sound traveled far, and they could tell that just over the hill was where the sound was coming from. So 5 of them spread out about 50 feet apart and walk up to the top. They couldn't see down over because of all the laurel bushes around, so 5 of them waited, and one of them sneaked down through to see what it was. When he got there, he stood and watched for about 30 seconds to a minute before he turned around and went to his friends as fast as he could, telling them he saw evil and they had to get the hell out of there right then. All he would tell them is he saw a bunch of naked men and women dancing around in a circle chanting something in a foreign language. He never told them about everything he saw. The guy who told my friend this story was one of the guys who hung back and didn't see what happened. In 2012, I was just north of Irwin, Tennessee, while through hiking the Appalachian Trail in the Roan Mountain area. While at our campsite, maybe 25 yards off a dirt forest trail, a blue F-150 pulls up, and a man gets out and says he's an undercover forest ranger. He says there's been a lot of kids causing trouble up around these parts and asks if we have any guns or drugs. It was myself and another older gentleman from New Orleans who also said he was through hiking and 2 off-duty Coast Guardsmen who were making a weekend hiking trip together. Before that evening, none of us had ever met. We discuss and decide that the guy was fairly creepy and decide to split up and scout out maybe a replacement place to camp. We agree to each hike 15 minutes north/south and come back and report if there is a more suitable spot where we are away from the road and the guy has a harder time finding us. After our little recon trip, we come back and decide there really was nothing all that suitable and decide to just push our tents a little deeper into the woods so as to not be spotted as easily. Around 9 p.m., everyone is in bed and asleep or nearly. 3 gunshots ring out, and they're not off in the distance. In less than 5 minutes, a truck comes screaming down the path with the high beams on, and the same guy from earlier gets out, brandishing a Glock with an extended magazine. He's hysterical and tells everyone to get out of their tents and on the ground. For the next nearly 45 minutes, he kept up the charade that he was an undercover game warden and/or fish and wildlife person. The story would change. A few minutes into the ordeal, it was fairly obvious he was unstable or on something. That didn't change the fact that he had a gun pointed at us. He would rinse and repeat the same lines over and over. 1. Do you have guns, drugs, or money? 2. You don't have cash? How will you survive out here? 3. I'm just trying to keep you guys safe. 4. There are 4 of you and 1 of me, you're going to try and jump me. Swing the gun around and brandish it wildly. Rinse and repeat. This whole cycle would usually last 6 to 8 minutes at a time, and for nearly the entire 45 minutes, we were either lying on our stomachs or on our knees. Fairly early on, the guy from New Orleans jumped up and ran into the woods, found out later with a cell phone, and called the police. They said it would take them about 45 minutes to make it out to the woods and hold on tight. Of course I didn't know any of this, and more importantly, the guy holding us up lost his mind. Undercover man shouted into the woods and said that if New Orleans didn't come back, the rest of us would be sorry. The guy actually came back. Seriously, he didn't know any of us, and even today, I genuinely don't believe if I were in his shoes I would walk back into that situation. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen someone do. The situation ended when the man demanded to search our backpacks for the aforementioned drugs, guns, or money. He was kind of easing into stage 3, where he's just trying to keep us safe. He leans down to search my backpack, and the 2 Coast Guard guys jump up simultaneously and tackle him. I knocked the gun out of his hand, quickly dropped the magazine, and discovered that a live round had been in the chamber the entire time. We tied the man up and waited for the police, who arrived about 20 minutes later. I was incredulous that their response was essentially, "Ooh, that's just crazy, John, he's really done it this time." Or, "Oh John, they would have been within their rights to shoot you dead." For the record, his name wasn't John, but it was very generic sounding. Here's the best part of the story: there were obviously empty bottles of liquor and a film canister with crushed something in it, and a cell phone with 14 missed calls from his apparent son. While this is being searched, it's explained to me that he was a former minister who got struck by lightning and became a pill popper and kooky ever since. He was known for playing pranks on people, but he had never gone that far before. I ended up finishing my through hike, but that was without a doubt the scariest thing that happened while I was doing it. Something sinister is hiding in the woods. Hey, folks. I'm kind of new, and this is the first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify this didn't happen only to me, but to my uncle too. This was after the Christmas Eve party. When everyone went home, I decided to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs into the woods next to a park, went off to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him not to do that, because it was too dark out there. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. He didn't care much, and he went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with him. Once there, anything wrong seemed to happen. Everything was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having a relaxing walk, as usual, and I wasn't really paying attention to the surroundings when suddenly, the dogs went still. This wasn't that strange. They always stopped their way to stare and bark at other animals they noticed, like rats, birds, insects, or other dogs. However, this time was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed something was going wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious, they were kind of nervous, anxious, and afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about that situation, we heard it. People in the woods, we didn't see how many because of darkness, they were saying something. "We all gather here, by the blood of, incomprehensible, we, incomprehensible, thee and thy, incomprehensible." As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his head back, and he only saw a slight movement of branches and shrubs, perhaps because these people were trying to hide. After all that happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near to those woods nor when it gets dark either. So, to the strangers in the woods, let's not meet. Creepy woman outside my window at 3 a.m. A little backstory: this happened about 2 years ago but came up recently, and I decided it would be a good story to share here. I used to live with my good friend and roommate in an apartment on the more sketchy side of town since we were poor and rent was cheap. The area had the usual weirdos and creeps, and we had a few encounters with some of the crazier tenants in our complex, but nothing too scary. However, this encounter definitely freaked us out the most. My roommate and I would have a weekly kickback with our friends at our apartment every Saturday. We would drink, talk, and listen to music. Pretty much have a good time and relax from the work week. At approximately 2 a.m., the gathering subsided, and everyone prepared to retire for the night. My friends typically stayed overnight on our couch, my roommate went to his room, and my girlfriend and I went to ours. After lying down I really wasn't tired at all because I still had a little buzz, so after my girlfriend went to sleep I watched YouTube on my phone to try and help me doze off. After about an hour I started to drift to sleep when I began to hear a faint humming. At first I thought it was the video I was watching, but after pausing my phone I could still hear it, and I realized it was coming from outside my window. Half asleep and not thinking clearly, I sat up and opened my blinds to see who was making the humming sound, only to lock eyes with a creepy old lady who weighed around 400 pounds and was smiling back at me. I froze in fear looking at her. She stopped humming and just stared at me, smiling. The best way I can describe her is that she looked like a witch. She had long gray frizzy hair, crooked yellow teeth that peeked out from her smile, and dark sunken bloodshot eyes. She was no more than 3 feet from me, separated by only the window. After about 10 seconds of staring, I finally realized the situation and jumped back on my bed with the blinds snapping back into place behind me. I don't remember how long I sat there in silence, but it felt like hours, just looking at the blinds, not knowing what to do. Just as I started to calm down and process what happened, she started humming again, only louder. Scared out of my mind I jumped out of bed and grabbed the gun out of my nightstand. I know this sounds overdramatic and unnecessary, but I was terrified out of my mind and didn't really know what I was doing. The commotion woke my girlfriend up, and she asked what I was doing. I shushed her and quietly told her someone was outside the window, then went into my living room to try and get a better look at her. After peering out the living room window, which is right next to mine on the same wall of the apartment, I couldn't see or hear anything. I finally decided to stop being a wuss and went out the front door to investigate, but she was gone without a trace. I looked around a bit to see if I could see her on the street or on the other side of the complex, but she was nowhere to be found. Being even more creeped out than before due to her sudden disappearance, I quickly made my way back inside to find that my friends were awake as well, wondering what the hell was going on, and a crying/freaked out girlfriend. I told them everything that happened, and needless to say, they were all pretty creeped out too. I don't think anyone slept for the rest of the night except my roommate, who, the next morning, was shocked to hear about the events that transpired. He recounted that a week or so earlier he also heard some kind of humming outside our apartment but chalked it up to be some kids or something and never looked into it. For about a month or so after all this happened, I couldn't sleep for the life of me, constantly paranoid that she would come back. I developed a habit of pausing my video every once in a while to just listen and be certain. I also have an irrational fear of dark windows now. I'll close them as soon as possible if I can and will be extremely uncomfortable until I do. Like I'm being watched. The woman, now referred to as the witch woman, never returned. We never heard or saw her ever again, but I will always remember her face perfectly for probably as long as I live. We lived there another 2 years until we finally moved out because of our schizophrenic next door neighbor, but that's a story for another day lol. I'm sorry if this isn't the scariest story for how long it is, but I wanted to share it with you all. Definitely a creepy encounter I will never forget. In 1981, my Boy Scout troop set up camp on a vast preserve that either belonged to the BSA or served as a protected wildlife refuge. A group of us, 4, went for a day-long hike, well off the beaten path. We were all between 11 and 13. A few hours into the hike, we practically walked into a group of 3 hunters, who were clearly surprised to see us. Despite being in a pretty remote area, they had almost no gear other than their rifles, ammunition, and knives. They didn't quite have a full-on deliverance vibe, but they were nearer than not. Anyway, they started nervously and angrily asking us who we were, what we were doing there, how many more of us there were, etc. While they didn't overtly threaten us, I was definitely aware that the rifles stayed casually pointed at us. When they asked us where our troop was camped, I had the wits to say, not that far, we're just doing a short hike before lunch, and then Tim the moron piped up with, what do you mean not far? Before he could say anything else, I looked at my watch and said, we only started out about 20 minutes ago, and we had to come up that steep slope. We haven't even covered a mile yet. They asked again if there was anyone else in our hiking group. This time it was Diabetic Chris who was quick thinking and said, not in ours, but there were other groups who went out. The main guy said, you boys stay put. Then they huddled up and had what sounded like a pretty intense conversation for about 15 minutes before the main guy said, you boys go back the way you came. You shouldn't be out here. And they stood and watched us walk away. A few hours later we reached our camp and told our scoutmaster about the experience. He told us they were most likely poachers and sent one of the dads to notify the Leo, and that was it. The campout went on uninterrupted, no adult asked us anything else or even mentioned it again, and no ranger or Leo visited our campsite. Yes, 1981 was a different time, but even then I remember thinking, shouldn't I be giving a statement to someone with a badge? Did you hear the part where we were casually held at gunpoint for 30 minutes? Anyway, I sometimes wonder if they were poachers or if we were close to someone's secret weed growing operation, and also if we came close to being ended and buried in the middle of nowhere. The cult in the woods. I'm not completely sure what part of Texas I was in, but I know it was near El Paso. When I was 6, I believe, my grandmother took me to a farm where we were meeting some family friends, and I was hanging out with some of the kids who lived in the area, and when I saw the woods, I felt like I was being watched. It was a death that caused me to remain immobilized here and there, and at some point, I began to hear whistling. This intrigued me, and I am uncertain why I did not perceive it as a warning of danger. Nonetheless, I was walking toward the woods until the farmer, whose name I believe is John, began shouting at me to return and warning me never to enter the woods. While I was turning back to him, I heard footsteps that did not sound like human, but later on in life, I forgot about it until I went back. I believe a year later. We went to go visit again, and while I was there, I kept hearing whispers of my mother and my grandmother telling me to come, and I don't know what or why I did, but I felt paralyzed, but I was still walking to the point where I was in the woods and I was lost, and this was in the morning, I should mention. Well, I went completely blank, and I guess I was missing for 2 hours. I was told it only felt like 5 seconds, but growing up now, I'm 20, and I keep having memories of me in there and seeing these people that look truly demonic and seeing them come to me. I'm not sure if it is true or not, but I remember the feeling. But another thing, ever since I went into those woods and missed that time, I know I was cursed. Or something was placed upon me because growing up I would always see this very tall man. He was all black, had shark teeth, and had red bloodshot eyes. And multiple times he would pull me from my bed, and I would constantly hit my head. He would pull my hair. I would remember waking up with scratch marks and so much more, and then when he would stop touching me or something, he would go after my family, and multiple times my sister was a victim, but it's still attached to me, except it's not as bad now, but I still see him here and there, and I've tried everything to get rid of it. The only thing that works is my religion. Whenever I'm in the Kingdom Hall, or what some people call church, it does not affect me in any sort of way. I'm trying to figure out if anyone who has gone through this has information. I think I just need to vent. I was at a sleepover at my friend's place. We decided to sneak out and wander around aimlessly. We stopped at our school, which had a small patch of trees on the grounds where the older kids hung out during lunch. There were rumors of a great Playboy collection there, hence our visit. While there, my friend stepped off to the side to have a pee. A few seconds later he comes rushing back and says, "Run." I didn't know what his deal was, but as a kid in the forest with only the light of the moon, I figured asking questions was a secondary option to being left alone there. We ran until we couldn't run anymore. Finally, my friend explained that a strange man was watching him while he urinated. He said that he believed the guy was creeping off. Being kids with a history of pranks, I thought he was ducking with me. Then I looked back and saw the guy a long way behind but moving in our direction. We kept running towards my friend's place, and he kept following. When we returned, we believed that we had lost him. We snuck back inside and turned off all of the lights in the basement. We lay there silently and terrified. About 10 minutes later we see something move by the window. We knew someone was out there. We stayed completely still and quiet. A minute later we hear a noise coming from a room in the basement. We both lost it and started yelling "Dad" for my friend's dad. He came running down the stairs, and we were yelling, "Someone's in that room." His dad flung open the door, and the window was open, and there were fresh marks on the wall from someone climbing in or out. For some reason he didn't call the police. He decided to stay downstairs with us for the night. I didn't really sleep, and in the morning my friend's dad made me walk home with him. A few blocks away, there was a large group of police officers. As we walked by, one of the cops stopped us and asked if we saw anything suspicious last night. We told him the story, which kicked off further questioning. It turns out that a kid went missing from his room right around the same time that we got chased home. They found the guy a few days later dead from suicide. They never found the boy he abducted. We had a lot of trouble with that. My friend's dad felt guilty for not calling the police. He became addicted to sleeping pills. My friend was traumatized by just how close he came to being grabbed in the forest. He started using drugs at a very young age and ultimately ended his life. I underwent therapy for a period of time and continue to experience occasional night terrors related to that night, despite it occurring nearly 30 years ago. Mountain cult. Well, this happened last year in the Rockies in the northern US. I was on a hunting trip, hunting moose. It was just past sundown, and it was freezing. I was sitting in front of my campfire with my back to my tent. I began feeling woozy. I don't know if the smoke had something to do with this, but I smelled something weird. Then, someone stole my rifle that was beside me from behind. I saw it was a naked woman. She ran into the woods. I grabbed my handgun just in case someone attacked me. Then, a group of about a dozen women ran towards me. One of them is, "He who harms the earth, beware, or the wrath of the mountains and hills will be released unto you." She put down my rifle and said, "Use this weapon to defend our mother. The message has been delivered." The women then fled back into the mountains. Lake House Weekend. After listening to a few stories on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved, bad feeling that just sort of lingers. Anyways, here it goes. A group of friends and I rented a place on a lake for just a fun-filled, drunken weekend. We were all in our early to mid-20s, and it was intended to be merely a large gathering. For the most part, that's what it was. On Friday night and Saturday morning, we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, having a great time on the water and engaging in various fun activities. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out that we decided it would be a night of no drinking, maybe a little marijuana smoking by some of us, and just kind of having a chill evening and night. That's what it was, relaxed. At 9 p.m., about 8 of us were inside the house while 5 others were outside. The house was 2 stories with a second-story deck/back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods. Then, down through the woods, you would hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town, mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-aged kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were large, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were just getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden there was this weird feeling that encompassed us. Like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong we both kind of quieted down, and then, out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up. I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all of the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all of about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself and darted towards the house with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was almost evil. Like just something so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the second story and ran out on the balcony with the other 3 friends. One of them is my brother. By the time we got up there the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" In the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it, and not seconds later the chanting began again. The 5 of us stood outside, peering into the forest and listening to the chanting, which sometimes sounded distant and at other times relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language, or I don't even know what it was. It sounded like a strange extreme church. Then, following the chanting, a loud bang like someone hitting a huge metal object sounded, and then the worst part came. A man wailing, like an extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was up, it was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it I wanted to call the cops because whoever screamed had been in a lot of pain. That mixed with the weird chanting just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing, and being weird, but no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync, followed by a loud bang and then a wail of pain. And then all that weird tension and energy was just gone. Nope. I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would've, but honestly the forest was enormous, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods and lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go explore and find where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home, I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now it gives me the worst feeling. Whatever that was, it felt so wrong and evil, I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine it was some weird cult stuff. Was doing some dispersed car camping near Bishop, California, one night on a road trip. It was approximately 11 p.m., and my wife and I had just prepared to retire for the night. A small white sedan drives by the campsite really slowly and ends up stopping a couple hundred yards down the road and just sits there for a bit. I dunno, the alarm bells just went off in my head for some reason. I tell my wife, I got a terrible feeling about this, let's pack up and leave. I hop out of the back, open the front door, and start the car. Maybe a minute later, my headlights illuminate some dude walking down this forest road in the pitch black. At this point, he just walks past our campsite and continues down the road. Eventually, I had packed up all of our shit, and we headed back towards the main highway on the forest road. However, right after pulling out of the site, that same white sedan that passed by was directly behind us. After a couple of minutes of being followed, we encountered the same guy who had been walking down the forest road. They slowed down at this point, presumably to pick him up, and that was the last I saw of them. I honestly think they probably wanted to just steal some of our stuff, but it was terrifying in the moment. Ended up staying at a disgusting Super 8 that night, but it felt safer than that campsite. A religious cult of some kind. So, this happened yesterday. I am a female in college, and a stranger comes and asks me if I am interested in joining their church and following their beliefs. What happened? I was sitting in one of the common areas of my school waiting for my next class to start. I was on my phone and had my headphones in. When two guys, probably in their early to mid-20s, one of them with a foreign accent, came up to me and asked to speak with me. Looking back on it, a huge red flag. I said sure, I should never say yes, and I was being idiotic. I didn't think it would take more than 5 minutes. Not knowing, the whole conversation was about how he thought there was a God the Mother figure in the Bible. As someone who grew up Christian and attended church my entire life, I knew that what he was saying wasn't true. I was thinking to myself about what he was talking about and how it was really weird. He kept showing verses in the Bible to back up this claim. The whole conversation lasted for 15 to 20 minutes, and he asked me if I could give him some of my info, like an email or phone number. They even showed me pictures from their website. All the pictures were pretty much all males in suits with slicked back hair. I did not give them any of my info and simply told them I was not interested in it. Afterwards they just left. I was left there thinking to myself, was I just asked to be a part of a cult? Has anyone heard this story of a cult group hiding in roadside fields to ambush people? This is likely a total dead end / long shot, but after listening so many creepy stories on here lately, I figured I might as well see if anyone has heard the potential urban legend or true story that I remembered today. This was told to me by a friend at summer camp, and I was told it happened to a family member of this person, but I have always been skeptical that it's just an urban legend. The story goes that this guy, who was a Vietnam vet in his 50s or 60s, was driving through either Oklahoma or Texas, can't remember for sure, in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere on a 2-lane highway that was surrounded by tall cornfields on both sides. Because of his time in the army, he was known to be very wary of people, and in this case, it would prove to be a good thing for him. As he drove along the road, he noticed a person lying unresponsive in the middle of the road, and there was another person just leaning over the other, but they didn't really seem too concerned about their condition. The man driving apparently slows down, but as he gets closer, he just gets a bad feeling about the whole situation and decides to get the hell out of there. The man apparently looks in his rearview mirror right after this, and then around what he thought was easily 100 people in cloaks emerge out of the cornfields and flood the road. The idea being that they were trying to lure a passerby into some crazy shit. I naively never questioned the legitimacy of this story as it was told by a good friend, but I remembered it recently, and I was compelled to see if it was another urban legend that gets adjusted by everyone that tells it. If anyone can link other examples of this story, it would be much appreciated. Nevertheless, it consistently serves as a captivating tale for a spooky fireside gathering. This story still puts a knot in my stomach. I feel this way when camping at Mount St. Helens. I spent a few nights in the blast zone region back a few years ago and could barely sleep. My friend was in a separate bivvy, and we both felt restless all night. So quiet, probably didn't help that it was a new moon and we were in thick trees. On the drive out of the woods, it was twilight, nearly fully dark. We had this incredible almost dark view of the mountain from the road. My friend was driving. Out of the corner of my eye on the side of the road, I see a human form. It's a man, clothed in pretty regular hiking gear, standing on the side of the road. No bags, no car. He is holding an arm outstretched like a hitchhiker, but he has the absolute most depraved, scared look I have ever seen on a human's face. Like that painting the scream. Frozen like a statue. Mind you, there are no other actual roads where we are, maybe some Forest Service roads, but he was standing like he just stumbled out of the woods. I scream. My friend catches it briefly out of the corner of his eye. We convince ourselves he needs help, maybe it's someone injured or lost or stranded or worse. So about a minute after the sighting, we do a U-turn and head back to check out the situation. Nothing. The man is gone, there is no sign of anyone having been anywhere. We park the car and shout for a few minutes. Nothing. Not a rustling in the trees, no sound of footsteps, nothing. Creepy encounter in Portland, Oregon. This bizarre incident happened about 6 years ago, in 2016. Let me provide all the necessary background info to illustrate what happened. I was 18 at the time and had moved back to Portland, Oregon, for college as an escape from the 8-year hellhole that was my life in San Diego, California. I grew up with a single mom most of my life, so I moved around a lot. I had lived in Vancouver, Washington / the greater Portland area for a few years prior to moving to San Diego, so when I needed an escape to leave SoCal as soon as I graduated, going to college out of state was the only option. I applied to Portland State University 2 weeks prior to the submission, and I got in. I arrived in Portland a good 6 weeks prior to school starting. Since I had some academic programs I got into that required an earlier presence to establish some ground before school started. So there I was. 18 years old, returning nostalgically to what I called home, living in the Broadway freshman student housing. I took in my sense of freedom by going on late night walks around the park blocks to Rocket Fizz or Voodoo Donut, just about anywhere. Now I have listened to true crime podcasts and watched a lot of true crime since I was in elementary school, thanks to my ex-sheriff mom who told jail stories for bedtime, so I should have known better than to do what I did. I was notorious among my friends for the style I adopted even in the autumn weather Portland has, and I would wear a long, XXL shirt, no pants, sneakers, and a clear transparent bag, yes, where you can clearly see my wallet and that I had no weapon, everywhere I went. Even on my 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. walks alone. This story is about one of those lonesome, late-night walks. I found a decent parking garage I would walk to most nights, near SW 6th and Jefferson in downtown. I would chain smoke into the night, no issues in any situation, but this one night. It was about 1 a.m/2 a.m. at this time. I was heading back to my dorm slightly tipsy, slightly high, and slightly nauseous from that post-Marlboro menthol smoking sesh. I had passed my friends up on a party at University Point that day, so all my immediate contacts were inebriated at a party not too far from where I was. I found myself walking down Southwest 6th Avenue alone, eerie given it was a Saturday night. Not a car or person in sight. I had both headphones in, focusing on not feeling coldness and heading home. Suddenly, a car speeds up to where I am, 2 men hop out and both go on each side of me. I pause my music and act as if I am not freaked the hell out. I am visibly intoxicated and probably smell as faded as I was. Let me also mention that at this point in my life, I had shaved my head damn near bald, was about 135 pounds, and wore large shirts. I could have been a pantsless male for all they could have known. "Hey, how are you? Where are you headed? You seem a bit drunk." The guy on the left says. I shoot him daggers as much as I can, all while trying to ensure I can still walk straight. "I'm just trying to make it home tonight," I say back. The guy on the right says, "We can help, or we can take you to our home." "Where is home to you?" I ignore him and keep my pace. I didn't believe in God then but was praying in my head I made it home, promising whoever I was praying to that I wouldn't be so stupid being out late, alone, under the influence again. Both give each other a look, and they start walking slower, now following behind me. I keep my pace and calculate how far I am, where my resident hall key card was, and how fast I could possibly run while making it to the building without being caught by the 2 men on foot or their accomplices in the car. Before I could mentally provide myself those answers, the car screeches back and they hop in, speeding off. I count my lucky stars while running back. I head to Mac's, a liquor store I and the gang used to chain smoke at. I call campus security and relay all to them, and to my horror, I'm told I am the 13th call with such a report that week. I head back inside to my dorm, awaiting my friends to tell them what had just occurred. Oh, but the story doesn't end here. Fast forward to July 2017, I had dropped out of college by the first semester, went back to San Diego for a few months and officially moved me and my family all up to Portland. We were pretty settled in our cozy apartment, where we watched the news. My heart sank to my stomach and I felt like I was going to vomit. There on the news. A trafficking ring in the next city over was busted, quite a few faces were shown of who was arrested. They were mostly women, with only a handful of men shown. I recognized 2 faces, the 2 being the men from that night. Yes, I was tipsy, and yes, I was high, but I knew those faces for sure. I called PPD and provided them with the information, with them verifying some calends around the time period of mine where how some of the members chose to abduct. Why they didn't abduct me, I'll never know. All I know is that I'm grateful. So, To the 2 traffickers who preyed on me but let me get away, let's not meet again. Creepy church people. When I was going to community college, I met all different types of people. The good and the bad. This incident in particular kind of gave me weird vibes and scared me a little. I would be at college all day long. One day after my morning class I had like an hour and a half break, so I decided to go eat some breakfast. I grabbed my food and go eat outside because the weather is amazing. I usually like to sit by myself because I watch videos, and I don't want to disturb other people trying to do their work. Then this girl comes up to me and asks me if I want to join her Bible meeting. Now I'm not religious, but I didn't want to be mean, so I politely told her that maybe next time because I'm busy with schoolwork and my schedule is hectic. Surprisingly, she wasn't pushy and left me alone. Then a couple days after that I sit in the same spot eating my breakfast and relaxing when the same girl comes up to me again, but this time she has a couple people with her. She asked me if I wanted to join her Bible study and said that they are Christian based and also they have their meetings in the back of the cafe. I told her the same thing again. That I'm busy with school and my schedule is crazy. She says okay and walks away with the group she is with. Now I thought this would be it. But it got strange from here. Next week I decided to eat my breakfast somewhere else because of the Bible study girl. Let's call her Tara. My school was having some sort of event, so it was a lot more crowded than usual. I sat down and started to eat my food, and then all of a sudden I heard, "Hello there, my name is Tara. I was hoping you would be interested in joining our Bible study." This time it was just her. I was kind of startled because, what the hell, I'm stuffing my face eating. I then say, "I'm sorry, but maybe next time in the future when I'm not so busy." She then said, "That's okay. How about we trade numbers so we can meet up when you aren't busy?" I was kind of hesitant to give my number, but I was thinking, what the hell? She is a girl, she is harmless. So I gave it to her. Almost every other day she would text me the same thing, and I was getting kind of annoyed because I thought she would get it. Then the last time I saw her, it brought chills down my back that I never got before. As I am walking to my next class, she stops me and asks me the same thing, but this time she is more persistent, and she has another girl with her. I have never seen this girl before, but she gives me a little smile and avoids eye contact, which is strange for me because she is using big sunglasses. Suddenly the sunglasses girl turns her head the slightest, and I see the biggest black eye. I got a strange feeling and chills because this girl Tara somehow always finds me and asks me so much to join this Bible study. Then this girl with the sunglasses is asking, so frightened and scared, I have no idea what's going on. This time I firmly said no and walked away. Now I know this might not sound as exciting as the other stories, but the last encounter scared me and gave me chills. Especially since I never saw her again after that day on campus. I asked classmates if they had seen this girl Tara, but none had seen or heard of her, and I deleted her number and also blocked her. I could be overreacting, but I'm not sure. Are some church people that persistent on getting more members? The other religious people I encounter leave me alone after I tell them I have a busy schedule. I really do hope that girl with the sunglasses is okay, though. I found a cult during a hike and am wondering which one it might be. I live in northeast Indiana near Fort Wayne. I was hiking with my brother on a nature preserve in my small town that almost no one knows about. The trail is publicly accessible, however, I frequent it regularly and have never encountered another individual there. Additionally, everyone I inform about it has never heard of its existence before. Anyways, we were hiking, and it was getting late. I had never been hiking that late unless I was camping. It wasn't dark, but it was about sunset when I saw people with torches up ahead and could hear them chanting in the distance. I told my brother quietly, and we got the hell out of there as fast as possible. Does anyone know what cult this may be? Given the location and activity? I didn't give it a favorable look, I just saw torches and chants and knew I had to leave. I don't know whether they saw me or heard us, we weren't being exactly quiet before I noticed them, so I'm not sure, but they didn't follow us or anything, so I'm just curious if anyone has any ideas. My trip to the Amazon was filled with creepy and unsettling encounters. In April 2019, I was an exchange student in South America. I went on a trip to the Amazon with a group of other exchange students. While many strange things happened, I want to focus on two that were particularly relevant to this community and unsettling. At the time, I was 18 years old, tall, thin, and white with blue eyes, mentioned just because I always stood out as a tourist. I was fluent in Spanish, allowing me to talk to locals without misunderstandings. The first incident occurred on our first night/morning in the Colombian/Brazilian town of Leticia. We were all lodging at a hotel. It possessed an unsettling atmosphere, and neither I nor my friends felt at ease. The hotel staff stared at us in a creepy manner, which made the situation even scarier. During breakfast, I overheard other exchange students discussing a missing phone. I offered to help locate it using the Find My iPhone app, and we were able to track it down to a sketchy part of town. The police accompanied us to the location, and we found the house where the phone was. The family denied involvement, but their behavior and the fact that the phone signal was coming from their place made it clear to us that they had probably stolen it. They came out with knives and machetes, yelling and staring at us. It was intense. I felt a shiver down my spine, and I had a profound gut feeling that we needed to leave. We told the police to go back and not do anything about it because we were worried about our safety and the phone wasn't worth it. When we came back to the hotel, the police wanted to see if there were any cameras pointed at the door of the room from the outside or the inside. The scary part is that they had cameras from the inside and outside. Only these two cameras were mysteriously turned off for 2 hours that night. I am also aware of another incident in which a member of the hotel staff turned off the cameras. I don't feel comfortable sharing that, as it involved one of my friends. It was very serious, and some legal actions were taken. One of our other stops was in a small village in Peru's part of the Amazon. I don't remember the town's name, but it had around 150 people. The village was built on pillars above the water, as the Amazon River was overflowing or something. After we arrived and settled in at the local hotel, we were taken to a stage where we were introduced to the region's indigenous dances, songs, and culture. After the performance, the group returned to the hotel, but I decided to stay back and talk to some of the locals. I wanted to see an anaconda, very dumb and touristy, I know. Someone had told me this was a good time to see them hunt. I started talking to a local guy, and he claimed he couldn't show me where to see a live anaconda but offered to show me a picture of one he had taken a few days ago on his phone. Despite what my parents always taught me about going to strangers' houses, I foolishly decided to follow him to his remote, isolated home deeper in the jungle. As we walked, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease and danger lurking around every corner. When we arrived, he instructed me to wait in the living room while he searched for his phone. But as I stood alone in the dimly lit room, my gut told me something was wrong. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was in grave danger. After what felt like an eternity, he returned and said he couldn't find his phone. He asked me to come back the next day, but I knew I had to get out of there as soon as possible. I thanked him and left, but my heart was pounding with fear and adrenaline. When I returned to the hotel and told my friends what had happened, they were horrified and couldn't believe I had put myself in such a dangerous situation. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something terrible could have happened if I had stayed any longer. Looking back, I realized that the encounter was bizarre even if he was truly just a kind person, but I can't shake off the feeling that something could have happened to me. It scares me to think about how gullible I was. Although I view myself as rational and occasionally paranoid, I ignored my instincts and placed myself in danger. Stumbling across a cult. My husband and I were passing by this big, glorious white building that resembled Greek and Roman architecture. Like a museum, it was so beautiful, and it stood out against the landscape, you simply couldn't miss it. So we decided to park and check it out, looking for a possible date idea. The outside had a massive fountain that a bride and groom were taking pictures in front of. Then a robed woman, I'll call her our tour guide, approached us and welcomed us to the church. The robe was a little weird for me, but I figured she may have been in a choir. We tried to leave, but our TG insisted on giving us a presentation. We really didn't want to listen, but we were just being polite. Then she took us into a room with a giant Jesus statue. And everyone in the building except me, my husband, and a few others were all dressed in the same robes. I started getting an eerie feeling. After the presentation, the TG took us behind a wall and into a room with a giant globe with Bibles in different languages. We then had a discussion about spirituality and that we weren't big church people due to our schedules. Then she mentioned that the followers of this specific church had no issues attending because the church provided them with houses and some food. Additionally, she mentioned that all the followers of this church were related to its founder. Then the girl smiled brightly and said, "You may have connections to our founder. We are very interested and have our own refined ancestry system to help you find your lost relatives," she said to us. That was enough red flags for me. I took my husband by the hand and said we needed to leave immediately. I started to thank her for her time, and we began to leave. She then followed behind us, and an older woman in a white robe invited us to stay while we were on our way out the door. She then insisted that the other girl would have the ancestry test completed promptly, among other things. I told her that we had other things to attend to, like a doctor's appointment, and then she politely said that they were always open if we had any more questions and handed us reading material. I then pulled out Snapchat, due to a notification, and our TG peeked over my shoulder and said, "Oh Snapchat, I haven't seen that in the past 11 months or so. Come to think of it, I haven't even seen a phone." I got chills down my spine. We sped out of the parking lot, never to return. This happened to me when I was 15 or 16, I am currently 22, so a couple details may be fuzzy, but what we found in the clearing remains vivid in my mind. At that age, my parents still shipped me off to summer camp, where a small group of guys, led by 2 guides, would take month-long trips by canoe into the wilderness. This particular trip was through the Blood Vein River system that leads from northern Ontario to Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. A fair amount of creepy stuff happened on this trip, such as strange trappers' cottages and the like, but the event that stands out is the evening we took the wrong portage trail. It had already been a long day, and we were about to start losing daylight, so everyone was pretty anxious to make camp and get some rest. We spotted a small game trail that seemed to be the right one, so we started down it without checking the map since we were tired and hungry and just wanted some dinner. It's at this point in the story I should mention that we were very far from any road. So far, in fact, that we were told that the only way to get to this part of the route was by canoe, kayak, or float plane. A couple kilometers down the trail, it opened up into a small clearing. Right away we were caught off guard by a school bus sitting in the dead center of this field. Even at this distance we could see that the windows were broken and all the tires seemed to be flat. The closer we got, the more we noticed, like the fact that there were burn marks around the edges of the windows and that the doors were barred shut from the outside with steel rebar. The guides told us not to go any closer and went to go investigate further. After a couple minutes they came back and very blankly told us that we had found the wrong trail and that we needed to head back as quickly as possible. Of course, being a group of teenage boys, we immediately ignored them and ran up to check this bus out. I wish I hadn't because up to this point things had just been kind of odd, but when we looked in the door, things got downright creepy. The floor of the school bus was littered all over with toddler-sized shoes. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there and put as much distance between us and the clearing as possible before the sun went down. I don't know what happened in that bus, or how it got somewhere that should have been impossible, nor do I want to. Whoever left that bus there, let's not meet. Hey Nightmare community. I have several real events that I've experienced in my life. These experiences range from the seemingly random to the paranormal. I'd like to start with an event that, had I not thought quickly, I may not be here to write this one. Almost. It was the end of the school year for me in the 5th grade. 1999, I lived in a semi-rural area and had to take the bus home from a school on a daily basis. This particular day was a half day at school, and my friend Danny and I made plans to hang out. None of this was pre-approved, so we went out on a limb anyways. Our agreement before we got off separately was we would meet halfway from our places, which would have been exactly half a mile from each of our houses. I got home and asked my mom to walk to our meeting place. My mom initially said no. But being that annoying 10-year-old girl, I begged her to let me be grown enough to walk. The slight guilt trip worked because I reluctantly agreed. And without skipping a beat, I took off. Unbeknownst to me, Danny's mom had plans, and Danny couldn't meet me at the usual spot. By the time I was near the halfway link-up spot, I got a terrible gut feeling in my stomach. As I was walking, I decided it would be to my advantage to pick up a handful of rocks. I stuffed a few in my back pocket but grasped a few tightly in my hand. As I was approaching our agreed meet-up spot, I decided to hide away from the road until she arrived. That's when I recognized Danny's mom's van driving in the direction I had just come from. I was still hopeful Danny was home, so I set out on foot to just walk the rest of the way. I got one house away when an unfamiliar white car pulled up in the driveway. 2 men were in the front seat. Both dingy and dirty looking. The driver had his window down, and he said, "Hey girl." I just knew it was malicious. And even though I stated we lived in a semi-rural area, I knew just about everyone up and down the road. I did not recognize either man in the car. I just froze. The driver asked if I needed a ride, but I could not respond. When I was growing up we had a mascot called McGruff the crime dog, and I tried screaming fire as instructed by the old hound, but my vocal cords stopped working. I knew I was in danger because the passenger leaned over to the driver and told him to grab me. That's when I threw the handful of rocks and bolted. The house I was in was located on a corner lot where the road splits into a fork. I knew the person's yard I was standing in wasn't home because he owned a gas station about 4 miles down the street. I also knew that at the opposite of the fork corner, there was a home in which a teacher lived. I knew she wasn't home, so my next best option was to run up the street to see if anybody else was home. I had to jump down what felt like a steep cliff onto the road. I remember landing on the asphalt and scraping my knee pretty good. I ran until I found a home that had their glass door open. I banged on the door in hysterics. I do remember as I was leaving the car peeking out from the driveway and speeding off in the opposite direction. An elderly couple answered the door, immediately brought me inside their home, and offered me a glass of water. They recognized who I was, and when I told them I was almost kidnapped, the man drove to my house to pick up my mom and brother. Cops were called, and I gave a thorough description of what I could remember. But unfortunately the men were never caught. A short time later, I believe at the beginning of 6th grade, I was playing in my front yard with my younger brother. And a very familiar face drove by and recognized me. It was the driver of the white vehicle. He wasn't driving the white vehicle anymore, it was a Barney purple van. I told my dad, I told my mom that it was him. He slammed on his brakes when he saw me and gritted his teeth, and it put the fear of God in me. At that moment in time he knew, and I knew who he was. But the look on his face stayed with me for a very long time. We gave the description of the vehicle to the cops, and I don't know whatever became of it because less than a year later we moved states entirely. So to the men in the white car and the man in the purple van, you almost got me. I may have gotten away, but I wonder how many victims did not. People dressed in all black with white face masks. This happened last night. I was almost home after a long day of traveling, and it was approximately 1 a.m. as I rounded a corner and stopped at the intersection right near my home. As I slowed down to a stop due to the red light, I caught a glimpse of 3 individuals on the sidewalk. They were all dressed in black and wearing white face masks or face paint, or a combination of the two. One was crouched on the ground, while the other 2 were standing crooked. They remained as still as statues when I came to a stop, but as soon as I looked at them, all 3 began crawling or walking towards me. I was exhausted, and apparently my instinct in moments of terror is to just laugh and shake my head like I was in on the joke. They were super close to my car, but thankfully the light turned green, and I was able to get out of there before they reached my car. Since you could see the corner of my house from the intersection, I ended up just driving for quite a while and then turning around once it felt like enough time had passed so that they wouldn't follow my car pulling into the street I live on. I imagine it was just some teens playing a prank, but afterwards I was reflecting on it being a school night and most people wouldn't be having sleepovers in the middle of the week. I'm debating if it's worth calling the non-emergency line to report it just in case. Regardless, I shan't be going out past sundown for quite some time, and I'll likely invest in some door lock reinforcements. Did we stumble upon a ritual? This story takes place a good 15 plus years ago, so while I do like to go into as much detail as possible, I couldn't tell you the day, month, or year. All I remember is that it was after school and it was still daylight, so it would have been later in the afternoon. Back in my hometown, a friend and I went on a walk along a public footpath that goes by some warehouses and through a forest, which we knew pretty well because we had been camping there once or twice when we were in Cubs. We hung out and played around at our old campsite and continued on with our exploration of the area. We wanted to explore some part of the forest we had never been to before, so we naturally diverted from the footpath. About a mile from the footpath we came to a barbed wire fence with a field on the other side. Knowing that we could not cross into the field, we decided to follow the fence to see where it ended. Honestly, we were probably near another town or village by that point, and we had no idea where we were. That was when we came to a small clearing. There was nothing unusual about it at first, as it looked just like any other clearing until we saw the bones. Scattered at the base of a tree was the skull of an animal with smaller bones surrounding it. This wasn't some small bird skull either, but about the size of a sheep's skull. Now, that is kind of creepy and not something you would ever want to stumble upon, but not unexplainable. It could have been the result of a predator. Until I turn around. There, between a tree in the shape of a V, was a hooded figure looking in our direction, not unlike a ring wraith from the Lord of the Rings. I didn't even stop for a heartbeat. I called my friend, briefly pointed at the figure, and we legged it. We didn't stop running until we were back near the warehouses and near civilization. I still think about this creepy encounter to this day. It is something that will never be forgotten. I had an unsettling encounter in the forests of northwest Montana. My boyfriend and I were up at the Libby Creek gold panning area on the evening of July 3rd from about 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. We met this genuine, really cool guy with his son, who showed us how to do it. We just did a road trip in gold pan and we wanted to pick it up as a fun hobby. Super cool family and helped us for like 2.5 hours. We had parked at a pullout down the Libby Creek Road where the first bridge is, both my boyfriend and I and the man and his son, so 2 cars parked there. The man started telling us about how he and his son found a human arm down the path where we were. Now I know this sounds ducking insane, but the son swore he saw it too, and he was only about 10-11. He was telling us that many people go missing in these woods, and no one ever hears about them or finds them again. Apparently there are tons of people living off the grid that don't want to be found for many reasons. The guy wasn't weird or creepy at all, just genuinely trying to let us know the possible dangers of what's out here. Halfway through the evening at about 8:30, I went to grab a sweatshirt and saw a dark gray truck with a hardcover canopy on it drive by with dogs barking. No big deal. I grabbed my sweatshirt and then went back to our spot down in the creek. The man and his son left around 9:30, and we went back up to our car at 9:45. My boyfriend wanted to check out a different area on the other side of the bridge, so he headed down there, and I stayed in the car. He starts walking back up not even 5 minutes later, saying he got this feeling he was being watched. Meanwhile, when I was in the car, I had the same feeling. I'm not a superstitious or anxious person, but I felt scared for my life, and I had no clue why. It just came out of nowhere. As soon as he's back in the car, the same truck that I saw earlier drives by, then stops halfway on the bridge for about a minute. The guy backs up his truck, partially blocking our exit from the pullout, and then gets out to ask us what we are doing. My boyfriend says we're just leaving and asks if he is the landowner just so we can be respectful and let him know we're on the way out. He says no and that he's going fishing in the area with his dogs, but at 10 p.m.? We're not local to the area, living over the border in Idaho, but this just seemed odd to us. He got back in his truck to back out more, but then stopped again and started honking at us when we were turning around about to leave. He got out of his car again and said, "Are you guys looking for something?" Immediately felt even weirder vibes than before. We told him we were gold panning but leaving. He starts going on about a campground up the road and says that we should go up there, as it's private. He persistently attempted to persuade us to set up camp in this remote area. Again we told him we're going home, and then he finally backed off, and we drove away. We both discussed how we had that same gut feeling someone was watching us and that something awful was going to happen. I think that the man had been watching us, or at least me, from down or up the creek at one of the pullouts and possibly thought I was alone since he saw me go to the car alone. Then, when he saw the other truck leave, it was just one car. That's when he came up the road and arrived just seconds after my boyfriend got into the car with me again. We both think he was trying to get me alone to do who knows what. The fact he saw me clear as day twice when I was obviously alone was really unsettling. We do not believe he was merely going fishing, as we observed him walking down the path without his dogs or any fishing equipment as we were departing. Now I know many people probably think we were just anxious and freaking out from what the man and his son had told us, but that guy in the truck was giving us the creepiest vibes ever. I've been stalked and almost attacked by a mountain lion, and I wasn't as scared as I was then compared to when this creepy guy was talking to us. It could just be all coincidental, but it all seems too perfectly aligned. Weird, scary encounter last night. I'm still a little shaken up and unsure what to do about it, so I wanted to ask this group for advice. My husband and I live in Munich. Around 10:30 p.m. last night, we were exiting a U-Bahn station when a tall, well-built guy began staring at my husband on the escalator. We got off and began walking out, assuming he was drunk. Suddenly we realized he had followed us. He overtook us and began walking backwards about a foot away from us without breaking eye contact with my husband. At first, we just kept walking, hoping he'd get bored of whatever this was and leave. It was really weird, especially because his demeanor was quite menacing, and he seemed to want to provoke my husband to a fight. Like he'd keep closing the distance and then backing off. Both of us asked him if there was a problem and if he needed anything, in English, but he didn't reply and just kept walking backwards in step with us. Not one word, just the weird eye contact he wouldn't break. Finally I stopped in front of a house that had lights on outside, and he blocked our entrance. The street corner ahead was darker, and I realized there was no way in hell we could continue this if he chose to escalate and pulled out a knife or something. So I loudly asked again if there was a problem. He didn't acknowledge me at all, and said that I was calling the police. When I dialed and put the phone to my ear, he took off. I hung up the phone because he'd run away. The thing that worries me is that he seemed to be wearing this cardboard cutout of a large cross, like a plus symbol, equal length arms, around his neck. Am I being paranoid, or was that a far-right symbol? We're Indian, and he was white. We were also visiting some other Indian friends who live on that street, so it's a little worrying that it happened so close to where they stay. Should I report this incident to the police or some other org? We didn't last night because we didn't have a photo or anything of the person and didn't want to blow it out of proportion. I'm still not sure what they could do with this info even if we did report it. Should we just chalk this up to a shitty encounter and let it go? I'd really appreciate any insight you have to offer, thank you. When camping became a nightmare. This is an experience I had a couple of years ago. The experience began when my best friend and I discussed our need to go camping again soon. We spent a lot of time outdoors and try our best to camp at least a couple of times a month. It was late November in Virginia, which can either be unseasonably warm or very cold. It was very cold this season. Our girlfriends had been recently picking at us about never taking them camping, because frankly we do a lot of primitive camping in cold, wet conditions, and we were surprised they'd even want to join us. As far as we're concerned, the harsher the conditions, the better the trip. Just your average manly ego bullshit. Honestly, I was stoked they wanted to come, so we made plans to go camping that weekend. Well, Saturday rolls around, and we are all packed up and ready to get back to the great outdoors. We head onto the highway about 2.5 hours west into the mountains. As we approach our secret camping spot, it is getting colder, and it begins raining. I could tell my girlfriend was getting nervous about the dwindling light and setting up camp in wet conditions. My best friend and I do this frequently, so we reassure her it'll be fine. We arrive at the secret spot, which is essentially a scenic overlook that you can park beside to look at the beautiful mountains. However, by this point night has fallen, so all you can see at this point is the flickering city skyline miles into the distance. Anyone that spends time in the mountains knows that it gets dark very quickly once the sun drops behind the peaks. It is still raining and cold now. If I had a guess, I'd suspect it was about 34 degrees. The wind was violently whipping as we unpacked the car, and I could quickly see our girlfriends' demeanors deteriorating from once excited to why did we want to come to this? To try to explain this camping spot, there is a small trail that leads off the scenic overlook that then drops vertically down a huge rock scramble, which, if I had a guess, is about 75 feet to the bottom of the cliff, which the scenic overlook sits on top of. This is not an official marked trail, and you can sort of visualize it as somewhere that teens go to park and walk down to go smoke weed. You are not allowed to camp there legally, but we were young and arrogant. We had a secret spot. It is relatively difficult to navigate your way to the bottom, and we always travel down very slowly to avoid broken ankles, falls, etc. I had all of my gear out of the car and ready to start making our way down this trail. My girlfriend and I made our way about 50 yards away from the car to the beginning of the trail. We sat down our backpacks and waited for my friend and his girlfriend. 2 to 3 minutes pass, and we are wondering what is taking them so long to get their gear out of the car. Remember, it's raining and cold, so we were feeling slightly impatient. After about 5 to 10 minutes passed, I was like, alright, what the hell? Let me see what's going on. I left my girlfriend standing there and walked back over to the car. I can hear my friend and his girlfriend arguing. What's wrong? What are y'all doing? I asked. He locked the ducking keys in the car. Well, duck. It is now almost 10 o'clock at night, freezing, raining, and we have no cell service. The nearest town is 20 miles away. Immediately I'm annoyed because if there is one thing to not do right now, it's what he just did. I walk back over to my girlfriend to let her know what's up. She suffers from a joint disorder, which makes her very sore when it's cold or humid, and I can tell she's starting to wince in pain. I yelled to my friend that we're going down to get the fire set up because she's obviously uncomfortable. My main concern is getting her warm, and I'll be back up in a while to help him figure out this car situation. We turn on our headlamps and start slowly inching down this steep rocky decline. Remember, it is raining, but the worst part was the mist. It virtually renders your headlamp unusable. It illuminates all the fog around you, which makes it difficult to see. I was helping hold her gear, she'd go down, grab my gear, I'd go down, and we slowly repeated this process for about 20 minutes trying to make our way to the bottom. Even though this is a pain in the ass system, we're slowly making our way down. Again, she hands me her gear, then she comes down, takes my gear, and I go further down. We're probably another 10 minutes from the bottom, where we typically set up camp. What is that? She says. I could hear fear in her voice. I look down the rocky decline, squinting through the fog. I see a tarp. I said, oh hell yeah, free tarp. I figured someone at the top of the cliff had their tarp blown off and they never tried to retrieve it, so I was excited. I start inching my way over to grab the tarp, and I'm about 5 feet from it. I see something that catches my eye. It's a handheld shopping basket from a grocery store, you know the ones. I can't make out what's in it, but it looks to be snack wrappers. I turned around, and my girlfriend looked like she was going to cry. Is that a ducking person under that tarp? I reassured her there is no way in hell. We are in the middle of nowhere. We're the only car parked up there, and it is freezing and raining, and this person has no fire, no gear, no tent, or anything. We are not near any major roads or trails, so there is no way it's a through hiker or homeless person out here. There are no stores, restaurants, or anything. On top of that, who could sleep on a 35-degree incline on slate stones? I inch closer to grab the tarp to snarkily prove to her she's being dramatic. My light is shining on the tarp. It moves. We both freeze like statues, and I silently stare because again my mind would not allow me to believe there could be a person sleeping on the side of this ducking hidden cliff with no gear in these conditions. It has to be the wind. My eyes must be playing tricks on me. I look back at my girlfriend, she's slowly backing up the incline. I look back down at the tarp. It starts moving. That's not wind. Someone is waking up under the ducking tarp. My heart is now pounding. I turn to my girlfriend and whisper shakily, "Run." Before I could even say that, she was hauling ass, scrambling up these loose falling rocks. I heard a half-awoken, gravel-voiced moan and started busting ass up behind my girlfriend. I stopped as she went ahead and turned my light off and listened. I could hear that person down there shifting stones around. They were up and walking around. We woke them up. Are they going to follow us now? I tried to stay reasonable despite my fear and wondered if someone was lost or hurt down there. I called out, "Are you okay? We can help if you need it." Dead silence. "Hello?" They were choosing not to respond. At that point I said, "Duck this," and continued up. We frantically made it up to the car, and my girlfriend is in tears, freaked the duck out for good reason. I'm pacing my mind trying to figure out what the duck that person is doing. No gear? No shelter? No car? No fire? Once we inform our friends what happened, they're now freaking out, because we can't even get into our vehicle to leave, thanks to Captain Dipshit locking his keys in it. Love you, dude. The rain has since picked up, and we are sitting under a tarp huddling for warmth while my friend walks around trying to get cell service. I am sitting there, staring dead at the trailhead in case that person comes up. Finally my friend gets through to a locksmith. You don't even want to know what he paid for after-hours recovery, but someone finally showed up. We told the locksmith what happened, and he told us to get the hell out of there and find somewhere else to camp. He'd lived in the area for a long time and then went on to tell us about the various mysterious murders that have happened over the years. Hikers missing, hikers found murdered. He said something along the lines of some people hide away out here for a reason. We didn't even camp that night. Everyone was so freaked out we just drove back home. The whole car ride back was silent. I still lie awake some nights wondering what that person was doing. Were they on the run from police? Were they just a highly hardened yet unprepared camper? How did they get there with no car? Why didn't they have a fire going if they were just camping? They were just lying on the side of a cliff in the pitch black freezing rain. I wish I could truly convey the type of area we were in. This is not a place a homeless person could survive. Any person who frequents the outdoors knows that humans are a bigger threat out there than most animals. I'd always heard that, but this was the first time I believed it. It made me reflect on how many things I did wrong. I never should have taken my girlfriend there that night. We were illegally camping in an unmarked area, surrounded by darkness, rain, and a lack of cell service. I was confident in my camping ability to the point I never considered an external threat like that. Had something happened, no one would have found us. I was selfish, arrogant, and naive. So much could have gone terribly wrong had that person wanted to hurt us. I don't set up camp at night anymore, and our girlfriends no longer nag us for not inviting them. We have never gone back to that spot. Biking in Midwestern springtime. I was living in Minnesota, in a town that was considered relatively safe regarding violent crime. It was the first warmish day of spring that year. I decided to celebrate by riding my bike along a nearby trail that I was very familiar with and that is frequently used by others in the warmer months. The trail meanders alongside a few residential areas, parks, and a river. I passed several other outdoor enthusiasts on my trek out, a bit before dusk. After riding a few miles, I decided to head back because it was getting darker. Perhaps I was naive, but I always felt more invincible on my bike than on foot, except when it comes to cars and small children, although the latter are arguably more dangerous because they are less predictable. I was maybe a mile or two from home and went under an overpass. There are 2 lanes on the path so that trail users have plenty of space to pass in opposite directions. As I'm going down an incline, just under the overpass, I'm going at least 15 miles per hour. I see 2 men in hoodies and sweatpants around a corner in front of me on the trail, jogging in cadence. There was nothing outwardly suspicious, they had proper running form, and it was still a bit chilly. At the very last moment before we pass, one of them sticks his arm straight out in front of my chest and strikes hard right underneath my collarbone. As I discovered later, the impact knocked the diamond out of the setting on my necklace and left petechiae, little spots from bursting the capillaries under the skin. In the few seconds of my fall, I first felt shock and disbelief. It must have been an accident, then confusion, but why would they stick a rigid arm directly in front of me at that exact moment? Then full-on rage by the time I met concrete, that Mother Ducker did it on purpose. I could have easily broken a bone or shattered the patella I landed on, and if he had been a few inches higher, he would have injured my throat. With adrenaline rushing, I popped up and started screaming, "Are you ducking kidding me?" They kept on running in the opposite direction. Fortunately, my survival instincts focused on the bike that I had purchased as a birthday gift for myself. I worked hard for it, and it was my lifeline. So, of course, I grabbed my non-functional bike and booked it up the hill, constantly looking over my shoulder. Once I started processing what happened and realized I should value my life over the bike, I stashed it and ran across some railroad tracks spanning a river to a brightly lit area. In retrospect, I think their intention was to incapacitate me enough to carry out more sinister intentions. They probably scoped me out from the overpass on my way out, waited until they saw me come back, and then struck as we passed on one of the most obscure parts of the trail. There was a high concrete wall on one side and the river on the other. However, our distance from civilization did not prevent them from hearing my screams. If they had succeeded in knocking me out, seriously injuring me, and stunning me, I would have been easy to haul away. I'm a petite female. There was a parking lot just above the area they attacked, which would have made for a quick getaway. In sum, I think they bolted because I was no longer an inconspicuous target. I don't think they were expecting me to get back up. I doubt they intended to rob me, as they could have easily stopped or returned, and people typically do not carry valuables while riding a bike. Or who knows, maybe they were just some sick ducks that get their jollies by violently knocking people off bikes. I called my roommate and then the police, who understandably said there wasn't really much they could do because I wasn't able to make out distinct physical features. But they kindly helped retrieve my bike and, bless their hearts, tried to fix it. They said they start getting assault calls from that area once the weather warms up. I ended up with some gnarly bruising on my knee. I also found the dislodged diamond. It fell into my clothing. I honestly don't think I could have had a better outcome, aside from not being attacked at all. I immediately invested in mace and a taser, and now I'm always on high alert when I'm out, especially by myself, regardless of where I'm at. I was terrified that someone would jump out at me, even when walking from my car to my house. Attacks by complete strangers are terrifying. Side note, I think there's validity to the self-defense suggestion of acting crazy when you get attacked. No one wants to deal with that shit, especially if you're in a semi-public or public space. River people. On Memorial Day in 2015, my boyfriend at the time and I received an invitation to meet some friends who were gathering at a marina located just outside the city where we lived. The marina wasn't in the best neighborhood, but the friends we were meeting had hung out at this spot on the banks of the river a few times before to go camping and canoeing. I'd heard from my friends about how the last time they partied here, a guy who'd just gotten out of prison ended up joining their campfire and how it had made for a great story. They all laughed about it, and it became something of a group inside joke, with Tyrone asking them to play Wonderwall on the guitar all night. At every party I'd hear about it. "Hey, remember that time at the marina, Tyrone? Blah blah blah." Everyone would reminisce and joke about how hilarious that night had been. It became somewhat of a tradition for them to go to this place on summer holidays to enjoy the water and surrounding nature. Feeling invincible and that nothing bad would happen to us, we decided to join up with our 3 friends for a night that was sure to be a good story for future parties. We did get a story to tell, but it wasn't lighthearted like singing campfire songs with a convict. It was something darker, something that we'd only talk about in hushed voices at parties after we've had a few and could brave bringing the memory to light again. It was already dark by the time we drove the 20 minutes out of the city to meet with them. Honestly, I was in a sour mood because I had to work early the next morning and didn't want to be out late. Why we hadn't left hours previously to meet them is beyond me. Knowing my boyfriend, myself, and our crew of friends, we'd end up drinking on the riverbank until we were too drunk to drive home, fall asleep outside, my phone would die, my alarm wouldn't go off, and I'd miss work and get in big trouble. I remember standing in the parking lot once we arrived and feeling extremely unsettled. I was pouting against the trunk of my boyfriend's car and giving him a stern talk, saying, "We can't be out here too late, I have to work tomorrow. If we end up camping here tonight, I'm going to be pissed. I don't even want to be here now." But since he was the one who had driven us out there and was looking forward to hanging out with friends, I didn't push it. He promised we wouldn't be out late and that he wouldn't get drunk. I almost demanded that he take me home right then because I felt so uncomfortable being there, but I didn't want to ruin our entire night. At the time I chalked it up to being in a bad mood and acting like a Debbie Downer, but what ended up happening later told me that I should have listened to my instincts and gotten the hell out of there ASAP. The marina is essentially just a big parking lot with a couple boat launches and a pathway that goes into the surrounding woods around the river. It was isolated and poorly lit, and since it was a long holiday weekend, all types of people were out partying in the woods. There were at least 4 other cars in the lot, one of which was our friend's car. We unpacked the car and started walking through the woods on a narrow path with a 6-pack of beer and our phone flashlights to see in the darkness. Our friends were already out on the riverbank with their canoe and had texted us their location. My boyfriend had also been there before, so I followed his lead. After a few minutes of walking into the woods, we heard 2 guys behind us talking in slurred speech to each other, saying something to us like, "You guys having a good night?" We assumed they were just wasted, or high, and laughed, responding, "Yeah, we're just getting started." They mumbled more to each other incoherently and went off on a different path into the woods with their flashlight. We didn't get a good look at them, but I remember they were wearing gym shorts and cut-off muscle shirts. Although they didn't appear dangerous, their sudden appearance had somewhat startled me. We brushed it off and weren't concerned that we had run into other people since we knew we weren't the only ones at the marina. Now it appears that they could have been stalking our movements over the course of the evening because of what was to follow. I'll try to explain the landscape a little more for details that'll be relevant later on. We were directly on a rocky riverbank, so to our one side was water and to our backs was the woods. We had entered the woods from the left end of the parking lot, if you were facing the river, and took a path that eventually forked in the middle. Once you reached the fork, by going down the right path about 50 feet or so, you wound up at our campsite and the riverbank. If you stayed straight on the path, you went deeper into the woods until the path met some fallen trees and really overgrown brush and ended. The spot we picked had a large, flat, open embankment, but further up, the path pretty much just dropped off into the water as it was on a steeper part of the hillside. It seemed to us at the time that there was only one way in and one way out of the area, and anyone who went up the path essentially had to walk past where we were all sitting. I'm sure there were other small paths around since the woods weren't super thick, but the one we took to the water was clearly walked on frequently and often. Finally, we reached our friends, who had laid out a blanket and had already cracked open some beers. We had all intended to row out to a nearby island with the canoe, but we'd noticed some people already set up camp at that spot and could see their campfire from the shore. Oh well, we figured this was just as good a spot as any to enjoy our evening and weren't miffed about the change of plans. We started to relax, had a drink ourselves, smoked some cigarettes, and then talked about starting a fire to keep warm in the cool evening. We gathered some firewood from nearby and explored the path a bit more, not running into any more people for now. After we started a fire and settled in for the night, I tried to cheer up, get out of my shitty mood, and enjoy the company of my friends. It was difficult, though. I found myself staring down the path and jumping at every little sound or twig cracking in the distance. The guys weren't paying much attention to the surroundings and were talking loudly, in their own world. At one point, I distinctly remember my friend's girlfriend leaning over to me and saying, "Do you have a weird feeling about tonight? I just feel like something bad is going to happen." It freaked me out because I knew exactly what she was talking about. No matter how many beers I had or how much I tried to distract myself with light conversation, something about the night just felt off. It's like the air was full of electricity and danger. A few minutes later, a group of about 5 men, ages 20 to 25, appeared out of the tall weeds and started walking towards our fire. I could see them squinting in our direction when one of them said, "Is this Joe's party?" I made out some silhouettes of figures in gym shorts but couldn't discern any physical features because of the way the campfire was casting shadows around the trees. They had plastic bags in their hands, which I assumed were full of towels or after swimming clothes. We all said, "No, you got the wrong group." They apologized for bothering us, wished us a good evening, and started back the way they came. It seemed then that their group split off into 2 different parties, though, because after the interaction, 3 of the guys stayed close by the tree line, trying to kick over a stump in the ground, making a ruckus, and 2 more had gone up further up the riverbank with their flashlights. I could see the light dancing off the tree branches and the water, but having walked farther up the path earlier with my boyfriend for firewood, I remembered that the path turned into a dead end. I waited for the light to start coming back toward our campsite or the group to walk back by us, heading back towards the parking lot, but they never passed by us again. The 3 guys messing with the stump left after a while, and I figured they went to find Joe. The flashlight beam disappeared from view, and I stopped thinking about it, turning my attention back to my friends. Something shattered our conversation about 20 minutes in, causing us all to fall silent. Suddenly, we hear a man about 50 to 75 feet away yell loudly, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" Then we heard a shuffling of feet and movement. "Get away from me," he yelled. "What do you think you're doing?" Then, the sound of something making contact with skin. No stop. We could hear a struggle taking place. "Help, somebody, help me," followed over and over and over. It then dissolved into what sounded like an assault. We heard a sound of impact, possibly from a fist hitting the man's body or from a blunt weapon or knife, while he screamed for help. We only heard his voice, as the assailant seemed to have surprised the guy and began attacking him without saying anything. He yelled in agony for what seemed like forever until he finally went silent. You could hear his voice weakening, his groaning faded as it seemed he went unconscious or worse. I can never unhear the sound of it to this day. My friend yelled into the distance, "Yo, what the hell?" And it brought us all back to reality. Whatever had happened just beyond where we were sitting. We had a small fire burning, we were very clearly visible from the tree line, and 5 of us had just witnessed someone being attacked. The rushes and weeds near us started rustling as all chaos broke out in our campsite. We had to leave the area and fast, but we were cornered. We stood up, grabbing bags and shoes, only what was necessary and within reach, and got ready to run. Someone doused the fire. We couldn't take the path since that was likely where the attack had just taken place, and someone was probably about to burst into our campsite and ambush us. I didn't dare look behind me. The canoe. It was the only way out. We started pushing it out in the water in a panic. I got in first, uncontrollably shaking and sobbing. My boyfriend wisely grabbed my purse and handed it to me while he helped my friend move the canoe far enough away from the shore for us to push off. My friend's girlfriend was holding me, trying to calm me down, but I was too afraid to move or speak. Everyone else was silent with straight fear written all over their faces. With 5 grown adults in a small canoe, all I could picture was the boat capsizing or someone picking us off from the shore with a gun. We paddled out into the middle of the river and watched our campsite disappear around the bend. Once we felt out of the threat of imminent danger, I called 911 from the boat and shakily told the police what we thought had just happened. The cop on the line was impatient and terse, only saying that they'd already gotten a call about the situation, and he hung up on me. As we floated down the river, the boat launch at the marina came into view. We could see from the water that the parking lot was alive with ambulances and police cars. We hurriedly docked the boat and climbed out, carrying the canoe up the ramp. No one stopped us from asking us any questions or even noticing us, a frightened group of hippies conspicuously dragging a canoe behind them. I saw some cops walking down the pathway that led to the river with flashlights, but they weren't moving with any sense of urgency. A couple of guys were talking with officers at the ambulance with their shirts off, wearing gym shorts or swim trunks, but we couldn't tell if they were members of the group that walked by our campsite claiming to be looking for Joe. But I assumed they had to be since the incident happened shortly after we all crossed paths. Strangely, no one appeared to be injured, the ambulance cab was empty, no one was in handcuffs, and everyone just all seemed to be talking calmly. Something was off, but we didn't stick around to find out if they found anything in the woods. We searched news stories for weeks after the incident and found no information about it. No victim, no attacker, nothing. Were we in the wrong place at the wrong time? What happened to the guy who was assaulted, or was he just faking it to duck with us? Were we nearly victimized by a group of dangerous youth who had identified us as easy targets? We speculated that this could have been an attempt to lure us into the woods to jump us, among many other possibilities, but we never had any answers about what happened in the woods that night. The next day some of the group went back to gather supplies that we left behind in our panic. They didn't find anything stolen or strange on the path near where this happened. I've never been back to that marina, and that group of friends has since dissolved and moved to different parts of the world. We went out looking for an evening of fun and got more than we bargained for. I was personally traumatized for weeks. Any sudden noises or surprises sent me into fits of panic, sobs, and shaking. Eventually, I was able to stop hearing a man scream for his life every time I closed my eyes. I'm glad we were all safe that night, but suspicious river people with a violent agenda, let's not meet. I had a creepy encounter with a woman on the highway. I've read so many stories here, so I decided to submit mine. About 6 years ago I was with my friend Tom at my parents' cabin. We decided to head off to a casino located on an Ojibwe reserve about 40 minutes away. The entire stretch of highway between is heavily forested and has no lights, meaning it can get incredibly dark. We got there and played some poker, tried a few table games, and grabbed some dinner with our winnings. Pretty successful night overall for the both of us. We ended up leaving the casino around 1 a.m. Considering the absence of any street lights, we left the casino a bit later than I would have preferred. We drive for about 20 minutes on the highway without passing any other vehicles when I noticed 2 green orbs just off the highway before a hill. Realizing it was a deer, I slammed on the brakes and waited. Several deer crossed, and we resumed driving. The car was going slowly up the hill because it was a starting stop. As soon as we made the crest of the hill, Tom screamed, "Holy shit." Right in front of us was a young woman walking in the middle of our lane towards us, no more than maybe 30 feet away. I slam on the brakes again and come within 10 feet of her. Thankfully slowing down earlier and climbing the hill meant we weren't going fast, But what was going through my mind wasn't the fact that I nearly ran over someone. It was that this young woman with pitch black hair wearing a white nightgown with no shoes was still walking towards us with a blank, expressionless face. Not going to lie, that image frightened me because it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Tom and I waited to see if she was going to pull up to our window and maybe ask for help or something. She made it to the front of my car and went around the driver's side. She didn't stop, but she raised her hand and dragged it across the side of my car while continuing her walk. At this point Tom and I were both freaked out. I asked Tom, "What do we do?" He said that we should just get out of here. For whatever reason, I just didn't feel right about leaving and not asking if she was alright. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that she was still walking. Having almost hit her and knowing that something just wasn't right, I decided to do something. I told Tom that I was going to ask if she was alright. Tom pleaded that we just go and get out of there. I put on some bravado and told him not to worry and that I would be right back. I put on my blinkers and stepped out of my car. I left my door open to provide some light, and I walked around to the trunk of my car. My interior lights didn't do much, but blinkers allowed me to see an outline of her slightly down the hill. Only able to see her every other second, I half yelled, "Are you alright?" She finally stopped walking but still faced the other way. There was no response. I heard Tom's door open as he was getting out to join me. Suddenly she started screaming. Tom and I ran back into my car, and I just floored it. I got a lot of shit from Tom for the remainder of the ride back to my cabin. Haven't heard or seen anything like that on the highway since then, and I'm pretty thankful for it. That was the creepiest moment of my life. I can't explain what I saw on the trail one summer evening. This experience happened to me when I was 14 years old. I hadn't spoken to anyone about the event since it happened, not even my significant other. I'm 20 years old now, about to double major with my first 2 degrees in psychology and anthropology. Recently, for reasons unknown to me, the memories of this strange happening have resurfaced and are continuing to plague my waking thoughts, as well as my unconscious and subconscious. As we are taught in psychology, talking about the situation could help with repressed trauma. So here it goes. I live in the high desert mountains of Southern California, situated just below the Sierra Nevadas, about 30 minutes west of Mojave. My town is no booming metropolis. At the time, our largest market was a Kmart, one of the last still in business, and we only had 4 stoplights in town. This takes place in a subsection of the town about 13 miles from the shops, banks, and restaurants, in a small community largely inhabited by retirees. It's smack dab in the middle of summer, and the temperatures are well in the high 90s to low 100s. My nightly routine would consist of walking my Australian Shepherd. However, I would wait until it was almost dark to avoid the heat. I grabbed my phone, a small pocket knife, some headphones, and my pup and set out for my nightly walk. My community is also home to a significant number of equestrian riders as well as cattle ranchers. The trails I walked were designated horse riding trails set between pastures. That night, I had decided to take the horse trail that stretches for approximately 2 miles between back-to-back paddocks. The trail is essentially a long, narrow path located between 2 very large backyards. My ending destination was the Equestrian Center, a communal equestrian park where all types of horse riders could enjoy various activities on their horses. As I made my way through the sandy terrain of the trail, I noticed that it was nearly dark now. The sky was becoming a deeper shade of blue every time I looked up, and my dog was becoming harder to see. I estimated my arrival at the Equestrian Center to be around 15 minutes from my current position, so I sent a text to my mother. "I'll be at the Equestrian Center in about 15 minutes, could you please meet me there? I'm too tired to walk back." My mother had replied, "Sure, I'll leave in 10 minutes. Now, at this point I was just outside the east entrance of the Equestrian Center, where the Enchanted Forest Trail connects to the straight trail I was on, like a 3-way intersection. You can either go left into the Enchanted Forest Trail or go straight into the Equestrian Center. Before I reached the intersection of the trails, I noticed a shift in my dog's behavior as she became anxious and seemingly worried. She had her eyes fixated on the forest and stopped dead in her tracks. I played it off as another animal within the forest, like a bobcat or boar, as they weren't uncommon in my area. I gave her a slight tug on her collar, although she was still incessantly focused on the forest. With a little more convincing, I was able to get her moving forward, pushing on towards the Equestrian Center, where my mother would be waiting for our arrival. Now, it was nearly pitch black with only the moon guiding me with its low light. There was just the slightest visibility, forcing me to turn on my cell phone's dim flashlight. Entering the Equestrian Center now, I noticed something that startled me immensely. A very tall person, a man, about 10 to 15 feet into the Enchanted Forest Trail with his back towards me, standing completely still, his head facing the sky and his hands open, palms pointing in front of him while his arms are at his side. He was tall, approximately 6 feet, with a slim build and short dark hair, and he was wearing what looked to be light blue scrubs, or at least a very thin blue napkin-like material, and he was barefoot. What startled me the most was his demeanor and what he was doing. His stance was enough to scare anyone in that setting, but, as I approached him slowly, it appeared to me he was shaking, vibrating, or slightly convulsing. But doing so while standing up. It didn't seem like he had any control over it, although he kept his balance perfectly. Scared and not entirely sure what to do, I asked him, "Hello, excuse me?" I paused momentarily and raised my voice slightly with the next question, "Is everything all right?" When I said that, he stopped shaking altogether but still didn't turn around or move another muscle. He just remains in that same creepy position and doesn't even move. For a brief moment, I had thought I might have been imagining this. I glanced down at my dog, and she was also concerned with the state and condition of this man and began growling quietly. Then I knew it wasn't all in my head. When I looked back up, he had moved closer to me, about 7 feet closer, now almost on my trail. I had only looked at my dog for a split second, and he did it without making a sound. He still wasn't facing me, and his hands remained open while his head continued to face the sky. I wasn't about to wait and see what this guy was doing or what his intentions were, so I slowly eased my way past him towards the equestrian center as quietly as I could before I felt that I was at a safe enough distance to start sprinting as fast as I could away from this guy. When I reached the first arena of the equestrian center, I looked back in the direction of the forest, completely out of breath. And there he was. The ducker was standing on the edge of the trail outside of the forest, standing there. Facing me. I was too far away to see his face, and frankly, I didn't want to. I couldn't make out features. All I could see was his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight peeking through the forest trail. I continued to run with no intention of stopping until I found someone. I had never been happier to see my nagging neighbor, Penny, and her moody mare, Jolene, riding in the Milano area. She noticed my distress, but due to her already harsh opinions of me, I had told her I had been on an endurance run and was just very out of breath and tired. I wanted to avoid any small-town gossip as much as I could. My mother arrived with impeccable timing. During the ride home, I broke down in a state of paranoia, distress, and panic at what I had just witnessed. My mother didn't know exactly what to make of it, so she recommended I file a police report with the local PD. About an hour after getting home, an officer shows up to take my statement. Following up the next day, the same officer claims to have gone and checked out the area but didn't find anyone or anything out of the blue, apart from partial bare footprints, but there's nothing incriminating or suspicious about someone going for a walk without shoes. He dismissed the incident as a jest, accusing me of being under the influence, despite my complete sobriety. Nothing ever came out of this. I attended weekly therapy sessions for almost 2 years following this event and never went on walks by myself ever again. I had night terrors about the man and still do. I'm still unsure of how to interpret this experience. I don't know if I ever will. Australian Outback. This story dates back to July last year. The story contains enough strange elements that I often find myself puzzling over what exactly happened. My friends' reactions occasionally lead me to question whether this is merely a significant act of self-gaslighting. However, upon reviewing the details, the peculiarities are sufficiently profound to leave only 2 plausible explanations. I'll let you be the judge. Anyway, a few years ago my best friend Toby took a cross-country grad position in Brisbane. A big, tumultuous thing for our group of friends, and amid the 3 a.m. power-drunk confessionals and promises to not lose touch was a promise of the road trip. However, life found a way to make our drunk promises seem very disingenuous, and 18 months later we'd hardly spoken, barring a few crowded hours when he'd flown over for a family obligation. Eventually the stars aligned in mid-July last year, and I, Toby, and 2 other friends, Chris and Alec, were able to get the band back together, so to speak. Queensland is a weird mix of tropical paradise, dead space, crocodiles, and genuine social backwardness. Cheers to you, One Nation. Queensland is very, very much the Florida of Australia. Australia is ducking huge. Not just huge but vast and extremely empty. There are on average 3.1 people every square kilometre, and 90% of those people live in 7 or 8 major cities. The Australian geography makes it really easy to get 100% removed from society, and it's something I often appreciate about this country, but the distance can be daunting at times because if things go wrong, nothing is close. Everything is amplified by distance. Our plan was to fly in, cram 4 dudes and 2 weeks worth of supplies into Toby's family sedan, and straight book it 1,600 kilometers north from Brisbane to Cairns. Being fiscally unendowed, on a time schedule, and outdoors inclined, we opted to keep driving most nights until we found an interesting/free campsite to pitch up in, which was a complex process of cross-referencing driver fatigue with the relative passive aggressiveness of campsite comments on the Wiki Camps app, worth every single penny if you ever travel Australia. Generally speaking, we opted for road stops, but one night, after staying too late in a particularly nice town, 1770, if anyone is playing at home, and reading a few particularly average reviews of the rest stop up the road, we decided to go off-piste and camp at an unmarked but seemingly well-known campsite. Around 9 p.m. we took a left off the highway and followed the Wiki Camps directions towards our campsite, about 2.5 kilometers away from the Bruce Highway. Despite the remoteness, we found the campsite, a small 30 meters clearing between the banks of an apparently croc-filled river and tall gum trees, already occupied by a single caravan attached to a 4WD. Being quite familiar with camping, I felt a little awkward intruding on what I'm sure the caravan owner assumed was a private spot well after dark and made a mental note to smooth over any grievances with a cup of tea and a g'day should we see the owners before we leave. We started setting up camp despite the frustratingly thick gravelly soil. Have you ever tried to beat a tent peg into rock? We weren't being particularly loud but must, however, have attracted our neighbor's attention because he flung open the caravan door within 2 minutes of us arriving and started one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had. Expecting a grey nomad, look it up, couple and a please keep it down, I was a little surprised by the 55-ish, bushy bearded man that approached us. He seemed erratically drunk and asked us if we had a bong, which we did not. I offered him a beer, and he asked us where we were from. We mentioned Perth. He asked our names, and we went around the group. I asked his name. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that." He then cleared his throat and made a joke. "You know I'm a prostitute?" Mutual unexpected statement silence. "Yeah, I'm great, but the others don't enjoy much haha." Awkward laughter. It is also important to note that Chris and Alec were not particularly interested in this conversation, preoccupied with tents. Minimal attention was being paid. Toby had made more of an effort to engage but was tending to his swag, and I was more or less solely engaged in the conversation. Despite the shit joke, which I chalked up to different cultural sensitivities, I asked him if he minded us camping here and what he was up to tonight. He replied, "Oh no, I'm just watching the State of Origin, rugby. You know I have trouble making friends." He pondered for 10 seconds or so and followed up with, "I used to have a good friend, but he was a crossdresser, so I had to end him." He said it so naturally that my general human statement interpreter again thought it was an off joke, and the auto response had already kicked in by the time I realized what he'd just said. "Oh, how far is the river from here? Are we in range of any crocs?" I asked before my brain could work out why. "Oh, only about 150 meters that way. With the shallow graves. You know my friend knows where some shallow graves are up in Hervey Bay. But yeah, you know, being out here alone, I wouldn't worry about the crocs. Do you promise not to kill me if I promise not to kill you?" This was enough to trigger my dumb lizard brain, and a very rapid understanding of danger kicked in. "Oh, do you think Queensland will win the State of Origin? It would be embarrassing to lose all 3 games. What's the score anyway?" I asked in an attempt to show I'm less scared of the snake than it is of me. "Good point, just come knock if you want some bourbon, boys," he said as he walked the 10 meters to his caravan. I immediately turned to Toby and asked how much of that conversation he'd heard. He said not much but enough to be a little bit shaken. I asked if Toby had caught our bearded friend's name, and he replied he had not. I immediately insisted to my friends that we take a walk to the river, despite Alec repeatedly saying, "I'll be there in 5, just let me finish my tent." I made it very clear that we needed to see that river right goddamn now. In the very remote dark, we huddled around a smartphone torch, and I explained the conversation I'd just had with our nameless mate. Alec and Chris, again, had heard only this guy being friendly and asking our names and certainly did not understand why I was being so edgy. Despite my being fully aware that we were in an actual horror movie, I agreed to keep setting up and wait to see if anything happened. I immediately started scoping sizable rocks to use in a mono-e-mono fight to death should it come down to it. 10 seconds after considering what a mono-e-mono rock fight would actually consist of, I asked Toby what we should do if our mate Mick Taylor happened to have a gun. He paused very briefly and then very quietly and aggressively pronounced we were getting the duck out of there. And so we packed up extremely rapidly, one eye on the caravan at all times, and despite protestations from Alec, we got the duck out of there. I still have no idea if this guy was trying to play a big old joke on 4 mid-20s guys or if there is something more sinister to it. You can get away with a lot when no one is looking, and there aren't a whole load of people looking in rural Queensland. Either way, I'd rather not meet again. This story I'm about to tell, only a few people close to me have ever heard. However, I never actually explained in detail what happened that night to absolutely anyone. For this story specifically, it is necessary to explain my general area I live in as it pertains to this event. I live next to Yellowstone National Park, which, in and of itself, has drawn millions of tourists each year. Part of the reason I am writing this letter is merely a warning to people who decide to visit during the summer months. In the summer of 2020, my friends and I decided to have a night out camping at a spot we had visited multiple times before. After all, the weekend was right after things started to become normal again and lockdowns were lifted. I decided to head up to the camp spot early in an effort to make sure my gear was still set up from earlier that day. I did this as an effort to reserve the spot, as it's first come, first served. Therefore, with everything in hand, I left my house right before sunset. We were all supposed to meet up within the hour, so I didn't really have any concerns about being by myself. I then began my 30-minute drive up to the location. When I finally arrived, I immediately noticed my tent and everything inside was gone. Now, just for some context, I staked the tent down in multiple areas just to be sure it stayed for the period I was gone. Inside was my sleeping bag and a few other miscellaneous items I left just to keep it weighted down. However, everything, literally everything, disappeared as if it was never there. I looked around, and even the stakes and rocks I placed on the outside were missing. I immediately knew something was wrong because I did not see any campers on the way up. Also, keep in mind I do not have cell service, as it's a couple miles back into the wilderness. I then decided to drive back down from where I came to get service and get a hold of my friends and let them know what happened. Needless to say, I was not happy with the situation and knew that whoever took my belongings was still in the area, as it had only been there for an hour or two. However, my friends insisted that I stay and at least hang out for a few hours, as it took weeks of planning. So once I made sure everyone arrived, I then decided to go around the area in search of any sign of footprints or indications that maybe these people were close by. As you can guess, I wasn't able to find anything. I eventually played it off and decided I would just look for it in the morning and contact the Forest Service to report it missing. I also didn't want to ruin the party for everyone and decided to stay. In hindsight, this was by far one of the worst decisions I could have ever made. As the night went on, everything seemed fine. So I thought. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, most of my friends decided to call it a night. I ended up sleeping in my truck. This was perhaps one of the better decisions that I made this night. That, along with always making sure to bring my bear spray and sidearm for protection from unexpected guests. I eventually fell asleep. However, it's important to note that I was still a bit on edge, as only a couple of hours before, all of my belongings were taken. I decided to leave my window rolled down a bit just in case I heard anything creep up on us in the middle of the night. After about 2 hours of me being asleep, my worst nightmare came true. At first I just heard something moving around outside of our camp. This was enough noise to wake me up, and I immediately froze and didn't move whatsoever. Therefore, this was partially because I knew whatever was making the noise was large. Not just a raccoon or any smaller creature. I then was paralyzed just listening intently to whatever was happening outside of our camp. My first thought was that it was a bear. We also had sightings recently in the area. At one point I swear it could have only been maybe 20 to 30 yards away. Also, another key point I noticed was that there were absolutely no other noises. Usually there are grasshoppers or birds, but it was complete and utter silence. Now in a wilderness, that's never a good sign. It means there's a large predator or something of the like in the area. Meanwhile, it's pitch black outside, and our fire had completely gone out. After about 15 minutes of not hearing anything, I decided I just needed to stop being paranoid. But just as I was about to fall back asleep, I saw something to the right of our campsite. It was just a few yards away from our fire pit and probably about 20 yards from me. To my absolute horror, it was a person. I immediately freaked. This was no average person either. Let alone the fact that it's 3 or 4 in the morning and you're in someone's campsite. This person was wearing what I made out to be some kind of mask. I got a very good look at whoever it was, and it was a deer skull on their face. They were wearing a black robe, and that's about all I noticed. I sure didn't want to leave my truck and confront this person, so I did what I thought was best. I turned my truck on and began honking the horn until all of my friends were awake. I rolled down the window and told them we need to get out of here immediately. After seeing what I saw then, I did exactly that. Meanwhile, this person hasn't moved, mind you. Just as I thought it was bad, the situation got even worse. More of these figures began appearing in front of us through the trees. Wearing the same outfits as mentioned earlier but with a multitude of different masks. I immediately put my truck into reverse and began speeding away. They began walking closer and closer, but luckily I was able to drive out of the spot in time. As I began to speed down the road out of there, 3 more of these figures appeared out from the side of my truck, this time with a dog and way more aggressive than the previous ones I saw. They began throwing rocks at my truck and chasing after me. At one point they were literally right next to my passenger window until I accelerated even more and eventually lost them. As I looked back in my mirror, I saw only one figure left. Just simply peeking and staring at me behind a tree. This image is forever seared into my head. From this night on I refused to ever go back up there. I've never, ever, spoken of this to anyone. Even when I was around my friends that experienced this, we never mentioned it to each other. It's been over a year now since this happened, and well, all I can say is that I believe these people were in some sort of cult. I heard other stories about similar events happening and even cattle completely disappearing. It's very barbaric, and you wouldn't think that such a beautiful national park that attracts so many people year-round would have such dark and disturbing secrets. My advice to anyone that decides to travel to these mysterious and preserved parks of intrinsic beauty would be to always bring protection of some kind. Likewise, make sure you let others know about your plans and never go alone. There are hundreds of missing persons reports across the national parks inside the United States, and I could have very well been one of them if I had stayed just a few minutes longer. Nature has a way to attract very different types of people. While some seek to explore and push their limits, others prefer to remain hidden and lurk in the darkness. A former Green Beret once told me the key to survival was always being aware of your surroundings and listening to your instincts. If a particular situation doesn't feel right, chances are it's not. Stay safe, everyone. The Man in the Woods. This happened in summer 2008, I think. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. That is going to require some explanation. I live in rural western Pennsylvania. All you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh or Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably isolated in a forest somewhere, too. My family did okay in spite of the economically depressed area we lived in. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine, it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever. You might think I was only friends with this kid because of the stuff he had, but, honestly, that isn't true. He's probably in the top 5 of nicest people I've ever met. His family is also amazing. They took me in for a while when my mom was in the hospital once. I still keep in touch with them. So, rich guy, good guy, etc. He had a lot of friends. His birthday parties were pretty legendary among kids in our town. Usually, they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projectors inside, along with a soft serve ice cream machine and slushie machine. The party in 2008, I think my friend was turning 14 and I was 13, was somewhat more low-key. The number of attendees was slightly lower than usual, and there were no tents or projectors present. We played video games for the first part of the night and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can vary depending on who's playing. My friends and I used to play it like a game of group hide and seek. The hiders would go hard in the dark, sometimes alone and sometimes together if there was a great spot. The seekers got the flashlights and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the treehouse as well as climbed some of the trees inside the yard itself. The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop car drove by. Obviously, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to explain why we were sneaking around a house at 11 o'clock at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a couple miles down the road, has some wooded areas around it as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's backyard, there are about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of this is going to become important in a little bit. On this occasion, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide. We were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out of the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back to the house. They went inside, and my group, perplexed at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening. Their story went like this. That round, they had all decided to hide back in the woods since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of paces inside but were still in sight of the house. Looking farther inside the woods, they caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little while to figure out what they were looking at in the dark. They thought it might be a tree or a deer or something else, but they kept focusing on it. When they were sure that the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinted back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off to the woods to check the situation out himself. They stopped him and said that they should only go back to check as a group or to wake up his parents, who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this to be pretty fun in a weird way. It was like being in a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low-crime neighborhood, and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. Even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare. We came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring my friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever collie mix and was the furthest thing from a guard dog, unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid with the other walkie-talkie, ready to wake up my friend's parents or to call the cops. I wasn't taking the situation very well but didn't really show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside when I'm usually a nervous wreck on the inside. I at least attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state as the original first group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. This is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original first group had done. The search for the figure took several minutes due to its visibility in the thicker, difficult to reach brush. One of the kids had swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something before yelling and running back to the house. Some of the other boys, who had gotten the same glimpse inside the flashlight beam, behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were those of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently, he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare them down from behind the tree. It was at this point that my friend's mom finally came downstairs after all the commotion. We explained the situation to her. Afterwards, she locked all the doors and told us to stay inside and to tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that the part of the woods we were going into was probably not their land anyway. They only owned the house nearest to the woods. Needless to say, I did not sleep well that night. We were situated on air mattresses in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one. Just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone else was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mom was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and had not seen anything amiss. We were all a little on edge, but things were pretty normal besides that. My parents reminded me that my friend's house was only about 2 miles away when they came to pick me up. The walk took 10 minutes or less. Even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while. I kept thinking how easy it would be for the man in the woods to come to my yard. Several weeks later, I am once again engaged in playing video games at my friend's residence. I brought up the subject, but he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was really pretty short with me. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his normal personality at all. He did come up with a short explanation, though. Apparently, one of his neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall with long hair. My friend explained that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that this kid had seen us playing and hid in the woods to scare us. That did make me feel a little better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there's a good chance that's actually what happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when an individual attempts to intimidate you, there is typically a concluding moment of acknowledgement, an implicit "ha, got you." Like most people, they want to reveal that the whole thing was good-natured, or they just want to show you how dumb you look over nothing. Back when we had our sleepovers in tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping in to see if he had scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident. This person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, wherein his only pleasure was knowing that he had scarred us for life. Or, if this kid really did have problems, maybe he just didn't understand how pranks typically went. His explanation also brought back an old memory of mine. I had been going to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friend and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yards. We played a game similar to dodgeball, using moldy apples that were thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It absolutely nailed my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside, where his parents asked me what was wrong. I told them about the game and the neighbor kid. When he had finished crying, his parents scolded him and said that they had warned him about this. They just said that the neighbor kid was not nice. For the record, he did not have long hair, but this was a number of years prior to the incident. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on, which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not among the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was just worried that I wouldn't want to come to his house anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time I had a sleepover at my friend's house. That wasn't really because of the incident, but because we were entering high school, and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, and that makes a fairly creepy story on its own. The alternatives are even more frightening. I don't even want to think about what kind of guys go stalk teenagers in the woods in the middle of the night. So, whether you were a creepy neighbor or creepy mystery person, let's not meet. A couple years back, when I was a junior in high school, some friends and I were going on an adventure. I live on the fringe of a major city, very close to the border with Mexico, and as such there are many old roads leading into the mountain and desert towns. None are really that special, just what you'd expect of an old road, all except one, that is. Road X is still stubbornly dirt, one of the few in the area, as no one travels it enough for the city to care. It is also the home of uncountable scary stories that stretch back generations in my town, covering everything from mysterious pigmen to a girl in a blue dress that kills you whether you stop to help her or keep driving by. How anyone lived to tell that one is anyone's guess. I think it's a testament to the power of the fact that most people in my area are fairly agnostic and definitely not superstitious. Save for traveling on Road X, there's genuine concern and fear on people's faces when you tell them you're going to travel the road at night, like me and my idiot friends running about school doing the entire day. And of course, for stupid teenage guys like myself, that sort of reaction makes it more than enough for it to be a mark of bravery, a way of proving your courage. We were all in sports together and thought we were tough guys, unafraid of whatever supposed ghost existed there. We were so focused on fighting the demons in that world that we forgot about the ones here. I had a girlfriend at the time, the kind of girl who liked to jump into mosh pits and was not scared of a whole lot. But when I told her what I was going to do that night, well, to this day I've never seen anyone's face go so white so fast. She asked a bunch of questions, like when we were leaving and where exactly we were going, a series of similar things that sounded like she was desperately searching for, hoping for an answer that would mean we weren't going on Road X. I offered not to go, as she was clearly incredibly uncomfortable with it. She ended up insisting I go with my friends, not wanting me to miss out, but before I left, she gave me her favorite bracelet as a lucky charm. My friends and I spent the remainder of the day engaging in various activities until nightfall arrived. We packed knives and flashlights, wore dark clothes, everything you would need for an adventure like this. When the time came, we drove over in my buddy's F-150 and met a few other friends of his at the entrance to Road X, where the paving ends and dirt begins. They decided to follow us in a Jeep the guy has, and after they finished up a smoke, we headed out. The F-150 I was in leading had 4, and the Jeep following behind had 3. So 7 of us total. It was about 10:30 at night now, I'd say, and we were driving pretty well. We almost lost control a couple of times, and the dust made it kind of hard to see, but my buddy's a great driver, and there were no significant problems. The guys behind us were fine too. That guy's been driving since he was about 9. And his Jeep was completely redone, so he was obviously having no trouble. We passed by the bridge where the ghost girl supposedly is and the brush where the pigmen supposedly burst out. No problems. Smooth sailing. A few minutes after, I noticed some lights off to our right and in front of us, in the general direction of the wilderness and eventually the desert. They flickered a bit and went off, and we didn't think too much of it. But very shortly after, we saw them again. As they were in front of us at first, they were now more off to our side, though still in front, and definitely coming for us. My buddy got kind of nervous, so he sped up. We passed by the lights, so they were more like to the side of us now, and we were close enough that I could make out the fact that they were truck headlights, definitely headlights on a vehicle of some sort. I just assumed truck since a car wouldn't be able to off-road like that. One turned, heading our direction also, as if to get in front of us, and the other one kept coming straight for us. At this point, as you might imagine, we were kind of freaking out. The one advantage we had is that even though we were on a shitty road, we were still on a road. The trucks were off-roading and so a good degree slower. My area is a lot of dry grass and dust. If you're familiar with the Mexican border region, you know what I'm talking about, and that off-roading isn't extremely difficult if you're prepared but still obviously slower than an actual road. My buddy floored it to get ahead, and we got past the truck that was moving as if to cut us off, with our friends in the Jeep close behind us. For the entirety of Road X, they followed us. We could see their headlights way behind us, but we were hauling ass, and our lead on them was too big, they couldn't catch up. Additionally, my friends are car enthusiasts, as you might have already guessed, and they had made significant upgrades to their vehicles. Eventually the dirt ended, and we got back onto a paved road with some twists, turns, rises, and falls that hid our view of our pursuers and vice versa. Shortly after was a fork in the road. After that, we didn't see their lights again, though you don't know how much all the cars behind us freaked us out every time we spotted them in the distance. We were spooked pretty bad but all got home without incident. The next day, I told my girlfriend what had happened, and she freaked out. When I finally calmed her down, I found out that almost the same thing had happened to her brothers when they tried to travel the road too. The difference is, they didn't get followed nearly as far. She made me keep her bracelet, she was convinced it was what kept me safe. But the reason she was so scared was something I had never even considered. You know how I said I live next to the border with Mexico? My girlfriend thinks it was some of the cartels out there doing a deal with buyers in the US. And that when they saw lights, ours and her brothers, they moved to silence them. Maybe it was that, or some weird redneck militia, or some asshole kids looking to give us a scare. But whoever it was, I'm very glad they didn't catch us. And I'm very glad my buddy had a lead foot on the gas pedal that night. The Raincoat Man. What I am about to describe will sound like a cheap-ass cliché movie script. But this did indeed happen. Even at home, barely anyone believes me without confirmation from the other parties involved. Buckle up, it's a long haul. Autumn 2019 in British Columbia, Canada. I am from Germany but spent half a year in Canada as part of my bachelor's degree. I barely got back before COVID hit. I was 22 years old at the time, and the other people involved were about the same age. Another foreign student and I befriended this local Canadian student. We all had the same interests and humor, and the dude became a very good friend of ours. He told us all about the local area, and we spent a week in the summer with him and his father at their very remote, remember this, cabin near some woods. At the cabin, they taught us how to handle guns and allowed us to shoot frequently, despite the high cost of ammunition. Then fall came, and we had a lot of free time due to being finished with all our papers. So our buddy proposed that we spend a few days at his dad's cabin, this time without his father. We went hell yeah because we could load up on booze and weed and have a great time there. Just living the life. 3 close dudes in the woods gaming and getting wasted. Sounds great, right? After loading up on all the supplies, the first 3 days were very calm. On the first day, just like the last time I was there, I barely slept and was generally tense. This is because I am a naturally very paranoid guy, and I often go into alert mode in situations, which is often mocked by my friends. In this case, what freaked me out the most was the fact that we were far away from civilization. And you never understand how quiet your surroundings can be until you spend some time in a remote area like this. Which led to me often just standing in the dark at night, listening to the surroundings of the cabin. But after the first few days I got less paranoid. After all, I was with friends, constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous, probably most dangerous to ourselves, though. Day 4 came. We spent the day trying to hunt in the woods. Mostly just chilling under trees with a beer and rifle in hand. But in the evening it started to rain heavily. After an hour, we began to see lightning in the distance, and there was a significant delay between the lightning and the thunder, indicating that the thunderstorm was still some time away. So we aborted our incompetent hunting attempts and started trekking back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to reach it, because it's very dark and the rain creating unsafe footing. For context, you should know that once you've spent a few days in the wilderness and haven't seen anyone other than your friends for days, you can become quite careless about your surroundings. I think you can imagine why I'm telling you that last part. So we enter the cabin. At that time, the thunderstorm was raging full on. We put away our gear and changed clothes. Except for our guns. Yeah, I know, drugs and guns are a horrible combination, and I wouldn't mix that shit nowadays. But we were drilled quite well by a Canadian friend's dad regarding trigger discipline, safety, etc. And man, I really miss spooning a rifle while sleeping. We cozied down in the living room at a table, started playing a video, and began playing cards. Barely 20 minutes passed since we returned. And at the time, we didn't bother closing the curtains in the living room, because thunderstorms are baller AF. So imagine that we were 3 guys, sitting around a table, occasionally in awe at the weather outside while playing cards. In such a remote place, it is extremely dark outside. Without a full moon and clear skies, it is pitch black. The only lamps we have are old-ass vintage looking and dimmer than my phone's screen. Next, I will share how my non-local friend described what he saw. While sipping from his beer, another lightning bolt went off. He spit it out instantly after the lightning came and screamed loudly and stood up. No words, just the sound of panic. My Canadian friend and I were instantly perplexed and looked at him. There is somebody outside. He started rambling about how, in that split second, the lightning illuminated the outside of the cabin, and he saw a person standing a bit of distance away from it, looking directly at us. Now, this is what I meant when I said cliché horror story, and barely anybody believes me at first. But this did happen. My non-local friend is obviously in full-on panic. His face looks anxious. This indicated to our Canadian friend and me that he was not merely joking with us. He did see somebody outside. I grabbed my rifle and pulled the bolt to rack a round into the chamber. I feel a warm sensation running down my spine as adrenaline is released into my body. I tried to stay far away from the window and stare into the darkness outside, but I can't see anything. While our Canadian friend rushed into his room to grab his pistol, I started panicking even more because I realized we didn't lock the door. Why would we? We haven't seen anyone in days and are in the middle of wilderness. So I run to the door and lock it. Our friend returns with his pistol, which he grabbed because there was a flashlight attached to it. He carefully approached the window, then changed his pace from sneaky to fast and pushed the window open with one hand, while the other hand was aiming the handgun outside. I wish I was any good at drawing. Because what we saw next when our friend turned on the flashlight was the most terrifying image I have ever seen. It is burned into my mind. For 3 years now, I have been bothered by the fact that I cannot share that image with other people. The light turns on. What we saw in that moment was a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, with a hooded raincoat, which he had pulled over his head, almost covering his eyes. But not far away from the cabin, just a few steps away from the window. Not standing, as our friend yelled earlier, but crouching. Looking directly at us with clenched eyes and a ducking terrifying little smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flash, and for that moment we were all frozen. The image of what we saw must have shocked the other guys as much as it did me, because nobody said anything for a few seconds. There is a hard to explain dreadful feeling about seeing something like this. In a storm, in the middle of nowhere, a person dressed in a black raincoat is suddenly crouching so close to you. And facing you. Our Canadian buddy just yelled out with a slight stutter and a higher pitched voice than I've ever heard from him, aiming his pistol and attached flashlight at the frozen, crouched, smirking man. "Get the hell away from us, or we will shoot." I believe that at that moment, after his eyes adjusted, the raincoat man realized that what he saw was not just a flashlight but actually a gun. And I was standing next to my friend with a hunting rifle in my arm. Raincoat man's slight smirk changed to something where I am unsure if it was shock or rage. All this was happening in less than a minute. While my friend kept on yelling, and I was just frozen, the raincoat figure turned by about 90 degrees towards the nearest tree line and went from crouch to full sprint quickly. He ran away to the right side of our window. 2 of us poked their heads out of the window to see where exactly he was going, but with the heavy rainfall and darkness, we could barely make out anything in the distance of that tree line. After a few minutes of just looking at each other in disbelief, we decided to pop off a few rounds outside the window to prove that we were for real, and to cope. When the shock wore off, we decided to call the police. They asked a lot of questions over the phone to help describe the location of the cabin and the man who had almost crept up on us, completely unsuspecting, and was only revealed by lightning and luck. Due to us being in such a remote area, the cops told us it'd take at least 1 or 2 hours for somebody to come out. They asked because of the weather and time if it'd be alright if they sent somebody out tomorrow to talk to us about all the details. Given how the man saw that we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back again. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right now. However, we were too lazy to refuel the truck before leaving. The idea of doing this now, in the dark and in that heavy rain, was just too frightening. I kept thinking about this guy lurking in the darkness and picking us off one by one. We spend the night sleeping in shifts. One person was awake and standing guard, the others at least attempted to sleep. When my turn came, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and just sat there in the darkness. Trying to listen for any sound I could hear and looking out of the windows to scan the area. Let me tell you, when you're sitting in the dark for hours in full alert mode, just trying to sit still, listen, and look around, you have a lot of time to think and reiterate what just happened. Close to the middle of the next day, 2 cops arrived. We had to give them a detailed report of what happened and when it happened and had to show them in which direction the Raincoat shade ran off to. They said they will organize for a patrol to comb through the woods, but that might take a while because they need experienced outdoorsmen, etc. Sadly, we didn't see many details of the man's face. We couldn't tell if he was young or old, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding out exactly who that was and what the hell he was attempting to do were very small. Though one of the officers expressed that this whole happening was deeply worrying. We left the cabin a few hours after the police left, and the Canadian guy's dad insisted we stay at his place at least for a day until we feel safe again. He also wanted to hear every last detail and figured that the time had come to install cameras around the cabin. I don't remember this part for sure, but I believe that I heard later the dad and his brother went back to the cabin and just sat there in the dark, waiting for the Raincoat man to return. But I never heard of any results, so I guess he must have gone hunting in other areas. I never heard from those cops again. Next January I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later. And it seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, looking for the guy who crept up on a cabin during a thunderstorm. I will never forget the image of that crouching figure in a raincoat, completely drenched and enveloped in darkness, so close to our cabin. I will most likely never forget this. I still sometimes turn off all the lights and just look out the windows in silence, trying to listen for sounds. Even though I am on the other side of the world now. We have speculated a lot about what that was. The winning theory is that this guy most certainly had sinister intentions. This did not look like just an attempt at burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on, you could see that there was somebody inside the cabin. This guy was creeping towards us in a raincoat during a thunderstorm. When my friend yelled out that he saw somebody, this guy went from walking/standing to crouching. He then moved closer to the window. I suspect the Raincoat man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu, and I don't really want to imagine what he had in store if there were 2 unarmed girls there, in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We didn't see any headlights passing the clearing, the cabin was on. The guy also had no backpack or something. Just the raincoat and black weather-appropriate clothing. I have no doubt that this man was a dedicated individual, well prepared for his mission. While writing this, I also started thinking about the logistics of it all. The guy must have a camp or at least a car hidden somewhere in those woods. You can't sustain yourself out there otherwise. I also got the feeling that he came upon the cabin during the storm itself. Or that he spotted us in the woods during the hunting we did before. We moved slowly while confidently waving our lights around. And in total pitch darkness wilderness, a proper flashlight must have been as easy to spot as the beacons of Gondor. So he might have tracked us through the woods until we reached the cabin. If anybody has heard about similar things happening in the area of British Columbia near Vancouver, please let me know. That mystery has a grip on me for the rest of my life. Occasionally I still dream of this raincoat figure creeping closer toward me with each flash of lightning. Thank you for listening. Hiking. So, I'm not sure how to start this, but here goes. My brother-in-law just heard this story this past Christmas, and he has been telling my sister and me that we should share it somewhere, here, anywhere. I am surprised that my sister had never told him this story, but it really did scare her at the time, and we never discussed it much after a point in time, and I mean it was almost 20 years ago that this happened. So it's an old story, and I'm pretty sure no one is in imminent danger. My family has some property that backs up to Carson National Forest in New Mexico. It's been in the family for years, and my sister and I both spent our summers up there. It's gorgeous, well, it is for people who lived out in far west Texas, nice and green, with cool mountain air in the summer. It was always a relief to get up there and away from the dusty ranch. My dad was ex-military, and having 2 daughters, let's just say we did lots of outdoor stuff. He taught us survival skills and how to defend ourselves. We hunted and fished and did lots of camping and hiking. To us it was always a fun time, but I guess he felt the need to pass on his skills to us. We spent several weeks in the summer up there hiking with him and exploring the old cabins and mining communities and checking the big ditch project that was built for Red River back in the late 1800s. I think that's the correct date for that project, but I am not sure. Overall, it is a wonderful place for hiking, featuring beautiful high mountain lakes, streams, abundant wildlife, and more. This happened when I was in college and my younger sister was still in high school. My dad was still at home having to work and would come up every few weeks to spend time with us. We were up there with our mom, and she mainly spent time in town or around the property painting. We spent our time on the jeep trails or hiking and sleeping, It was late June, maybe early July, I think, and we had decided we were going to hike up to Lost Lake. It's one of my favorite lakes up there because if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like a heart. We set off in the morning and were prepared. We both had a small pack, our water, and some snacks, and we both had a small hammock we planned to set up once we got to the lake so we could just enjoy the area for a while. I will admit to being an outdoor type and swear when it's quiet enough you can hear the trees talk. We also both always carried a knife when we hiked. My dad always insisted we have something, just in case an accident happened or we just needed it. The hike was going good. Since the summer cabin is pretty far up the valley, we just set out on foot to the trailhead. To get to Lost Lake, you take another trail that goes up to Middle Fork Lake. Then you break off that trail for Lost Lake. We run into a few other hikers, but they are going to Middle Fork Lake, and we were pleased because it looked like we could possibly have Lost Lake all to ourselves. It's a pretty good hike with some long switchbacks at the end, but it's totally worth it because the lake is just beautiful and a very pretty emerald green in color. We got there and saw that we did have the lake to ourselves. We hiked around the lake and decided to hike back a bit to find a good spot to set up our hammocks. We walked into the tree line, and the first thing my sister said was, "Do you smell that?" And yep, I did. It was a dead animal with a strong scent of blood. We had both done lots of hunting and knew that smell. And that's when I saw it. It was a deer carcass, but what was around it was what disgusted me. Placed around the deer carcass in a circle were its organs, entrails, etc. But it wasn't like it was being cleaned, it's like they were placed in a certain arrangement. With little piles of rocks in between everything. Now I know how some people get disgusting with their kills, and I have had some guys try to gross me out, but I don't fall for crap like that. But this made me uneasy. It wasn't just being cleaned, it was like it was set up in a certain meaning, or it had meaning. I stepped back from this weird circle, and then my sister started to say my name but stopped. Because then we see the guy who had done this. And he looks like he just climbed out from inside the deer because he is covered in blood and doesn't have much clothing on. At first I thought he didn't have anything on, but honestly I didn't try to check him out much. He was standing back away from his gruesome little circle, just standing close to a group of trees that were pretty close together. He was maybe 20 feet from us. I think he was maybe trying to hide? Not for sure, but my dad had always taught us that if we ever found ourselves in a situation where we didn't feel in control, we should do everything in our power to try to take control of the situation. Do something that is going to take the other person by surprise, don't do what they expect you to do. So this was raging through my brain, and I also could tell my sister was about to freak the heck out, so I stepped up and said, "Hey, pretty good kill you got there. Did you use a bow?" The guy just stood there, his eyes all crazy wide like he was stoked out of his brain on planet Pluto. So I'm thinking, great, we ran into a guy getting his hunt on, and he had lost it and was getting blood crazy with his deer. He was staring me down, and I was staring right back, and my sister was getting ready to run. I still don't know what came over me, but I then put my hand on my knife that I kept on my waist just to show him that I wasn't completely helpless. I don't know why I did it, but something told me to let him know that I wasn't going to back down or be afraid. I kept eye contact with him, and I would guess he was maybe in his early 30s? But I am bad at guessing people's ages. He was pretty dirty, though. You could tell that even with all the blood he had everywhere. I started to back off, and my sister had moved behind me, so I spoke again and said, "So, you have a great hunting day." Again, the crazy didn't say a thing, just stood there like he was a statue or something, or like he thought I couldn't see him if he didn't move or make any sound. We moved back to the lakeside again and biked it around the lake. My sister stayed up front, and she was shaking pretty bad. I was mainly pissed off at first because if he wanted to get all crazy in the woods with his deer, then he should have gone further back up in the forest. We got back to the trailhead and stopped to get our bearings and looked at each other. I was scanning the forest line to make sure we weren't being followed, and my sister was just in shock. We started down the trail pretty fast, and I was hoping I could keep my sister together until we could at least reach the Middle Fork Lake Trail, or that we would even run into some more hikers. But the odds weren't good on this particular trail because you have to get an early start on the Lost Lake Trail, and by now it was late morning/noon. We were making good time, but we hadn't discussed what we had seen. Instead, we just started hiking back down. I started to get that feeling when you just know you aren't alone. I kept checking, but I didn't see anything or even hear anything at first. My sister refused to look back and just kept going, but I felt that I had to keep checking to make sure the idiot wasn't following us. That's when the first stuff came flying at us. It was some small pebbles, but it really pissed me off because it was obvious someone was throwing them at us, and it could have only been him. My sister was almost running at this point. But I am a mouthy smart aleck, I blame the Texas upbringing, and darn it, this was my forest. I had grown up here, and these were my lakes and my trails, and I wasn't about to let some crazy dude ruin it for me. I started yelling back that he needed to go back to his deer and leave us alone. At this point my sister is telling me to shut up and just come on. And I am thinking, no way, this guy is just trying to scare us. The pebbles stopped, and then we started hearing barking and growling noises. My sister said, "Now he is growling at us?" And I just told her to get on down the trail and ignore it. He was behind us pretty much the whole way, growling and making these barking noises every once in a while, but I never caught a glimpse of him. Once we got close to where the trail joined in with the Middle Fork Trail, he seemed to back off. I never caught sight of him behind us, but I could hear him, and I just knew he was there. We started down the rest of the trail. My sister refused to stop or look behind her, so I kept checking every so often. Didn't see anything or hear anything. We started to discuss what had happened, and she felt like he was very sinister and felt like we had been in a dangerous situation. I felt like he was just getting his kicks out of scaring two girls. I mean, he had to have heard us coming around the lake. We weren't being quiet, it was the opposite because there are black bears up there, and we would always be pretty loud while hiking, hoping to scare off any bear in the area so we wouldn't come upon one. To this day she still thinks he was sinister, and I think he was just trying to scare two girls and was getting his kicks out of it. We told our parents, and my dad didn't like what he heard. He did teach us some more up-close defense skills after that day. And forbid us from ever hiking alone or just the two of us again. We didn't hike up that trail for several years with anyone. It freaked my sister out, and I just didn't like remembering a time I was scared in the forest that I considered my own. I didn't know it at the time, but after we had gotten back to the house and told my mom, she had called some neighbors, and a few of the men hiked up there the next day to check things out. They did find the deer carcass and some empty hiking packs like what day hikers use, but they were empty. They also discovered a cleared-out rustic campsite located further back in the woods. Chased through Satansville by a possible cult member. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there is a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and many legends. It is formally known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories, which made me unable to stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville, without telling our parents, became another weekly tradition of sorts, after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips, we would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying. Until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice with daylight, and the remainder in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend, Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn leading to seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we'd never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flew in through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight, a few trucks pulling out of driveways, the like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively, not just a tilt but a complete bend in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible, for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down. Looking back at me, straight into my eyes like he'd been looking at me long before I looked to him, was a young man, maybe about 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part, his neck was turned completely towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straightforward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt laughing at her antics. I couldn't break his gaze, I was stuck staring at him until finally, Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed 2 black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn, flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not gonna lie, that freaked us out, and the return of 1 truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous, probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666s and upside-down crosses, marks of other, more ballsy, teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods, courtesy of God knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road and remained in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy, but more normal. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns, where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up, and got closer. At this point, we were losing our shit. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do God knows what. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible, and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though, when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the duck had just happened. We came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road only visible to those who know it's there and that they were chasing us away from their activities, like the rumors say. What were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we had no intention of finding out, as we haven't been back since. I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out of my head, and this was over a year ago now. Weirdo of the wilderness. This bizarre incident occurred roughly 14 years ago when I was 12 years old and living in the east side Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house was on a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It was also very useful because, as you may know, Australia has many deadly creatures. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town center. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, say, while we were at school, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on the side of a large mountain roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails we could walk, and they led to a stream and a small waterfall, 5 to 6 meters drop. It was a truly beautiful place but considerably scary to me and my small siblings, one brother and one sister slightly younger than me. We knew our neighbors on both sides of the property, but because the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbors were roughly a 10 minutes drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave to us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to our house every day. I think our parents asked for her to keep an eye on us. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy shit happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one in particular involved a guy I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions. One day, though, a man in a ute came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad that there was a strange person here. Without hesitation, he went outside to find out who this unwelcome visitor was. A little background about my dad: he is literally the most hardcore person you will ever meet. He has one leg after having it amputated earlier in his life after having an accident on a motorcycle, while he was running from police. He was in the Navy and was brought up in a very strict household. He had grown up in a very rough part of Sydney's west, so he had some pretty shady contacts too. In short, he is someone you really wouldn't want to duck with. I wouldn't be surprised if he had killed someone in his life prior to having kids. Anyway, my dad goes outside to see what all the commotion is about while my mom keeps us inside, being protective. The man has a large red-furred dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad but immediately cowered when the stranger told it to shut up. Our own dog Millie, renowned beast killer, just for the record, was snarling and going ballistic whilst being chained up to the house. "Hi, my name is John." The way the man spoke was like he was a salesman, a really slick and smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly but with the overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what the duck are you doing here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while, and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did, however, overhear my dad say, "What the duck are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently John was on the other side of her property and went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around at our house until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. P.S. The reason I now know all this is from asking my mother at the time and my father some years later. The police left without any more questions, as it looked like she had died from natural causes. John was still at our house. I found him to be a very unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes. He was unfamiliar but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night, and I was trying to watch TV, and he was playing songs on his guitar with my mom and dad at the table. I was angry because he was ruining my shows, and I told Mom I wanted him to go and that I thought he was weird. She smiled, expressed that she felt the same way, and suggested that I should go to bed. The next day things seemed normal. I went to school and came home. Not seeing the familiar friendly face of the old woman stung a bit on my way past her house. It felt strange, and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home until halfway down the driveway I noticed John's ute again parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. He walked outside with my dad, and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss. Again, that sense of overfamiliarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man, I didn't like this man, and I was hoping he would never come down our driveway again. My dad then pulled me aside and asked me what I thought of John. I labeled him a weirdo and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row, when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mom and dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mom and dad argue about him hanging around until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave, as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found that very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mom and dad had a big talk in their room, and my dad told us all that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him not to come over anymore, and if we saw John again, immediately tell him. The next day was a Saturday, so we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim, as it was getting pretty warm. Around 11 a.m., the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me, and I go outside. I run back inside to tell my dad that John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside, and we stay inside with my mom, watching and listening through a screen door. John, again with his weird, overfamiliar smile and dark eyes, greets my dad and is met with, "Look mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you coming around here anymore. You scare my kids, and my wife, and I don't want you to come back. You understand?" I didn't hear John's reply. From his tone, it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. Dad wasn't having it and told him to go or he would call the cops. As he was leaving, Dad said, "Don't come back, or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on the man, his face completely changes to one of rage. He glares at us in the house. He sticks up his finger and speeds out of the driveway, shouting profanities and churning up gravel that sprays towards our house. My dad came back and told us we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were going to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted when he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember whether it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before he even got out of the ute, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm going to smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them of what happened. Apparently they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened to that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happenings with John, and we all felt like things were back to normal. This was until our mailbox had been tipped out of the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he suspected John was responsible based on how their last conversation ended. The next weekend after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get groceries and a fast food dinner, as a bit of a treat, and when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mom from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport where we parked our car, at the back of the house, there was a window that opened to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted the window was missing. As we drove down, he got increasingly more tense until we all noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat, not really knowing what was going on. Until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, overfamiliar, coming from the window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage. He told my mom to rush down the driveway so we could duck this guy up. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into thick lantana, a really thorny shrub-like plant. My dad, only being on one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic tied up to the house. She raced down the lantana engulfed hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police arrived the following day and searched for fingerprints, but they found none. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us they would look into it once again. That was the last time we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself and get ready for high school. The school I went to was pretty large considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including the teaching staff. Within my first week at the school, we were introduced to all the teachers and teacher aides. I was caught completely unaware when that overfamiliar dark-eyed man from the previous year was reintroduced as a teacher aide. Except instead of John, he was introduced as Gregory something. I went into a little bit of a spin as I was trying to make sense of it all. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg was the same man who had introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, a flood of thoughts rushed into my head. What if he ended the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the body so he could frame my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else was he lying about? What if police never even made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes trying to piece it together until the teacher called my name to bring me back to reality. That is when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked, his eyes were wide, and he said nothing. Just staring. I had just found out his dirty little secret. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked if I was sure. He went to the school the next day and discovered the man had put in for indefinite leave yesterday and may not return. When we learned of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return. So John, Greg, or whoever you are, let's not meet again. A winter wonderland. My family owns a cabin in upstate NH, and it is literally my favorite place in the world. It's on a small, very secluded lake, shared by only a few other cabins, one other cabin on my side, 6 in total. Most of my neighbors only come by in spring and fall, and even then, I rarely see them. While we each tend to our own interests, we also make a concerted effort to protect each other. During off-season visits, we will check on each other's property to ensure there are no storm damages or break-ins. We all try to be good neighbors, because the lake is a very popular fishing location in the area as a result of it being so secluded. It's not unusual to see people who don't live on the lake out in a boat or hiking around with a fishing pole. In the winter it becomes a popular place for ice fishing and snowmobiling. So again, it kind of reinforces why all of us who own property on the lake try to look out for one another, as there are people coming and going at all times of the year. There have been a few break-ins on the lake over the years, but honestly, in the 30-plus years I've been going up to the cabin, there have only been a handful. Occasionally someone's canoe or kayak will go missing, but that's pretty much the worst of it, until this winter. My wife and I decided to take a week-long vacation at the cabin this winter. She was getting ready to start a new job, and I had leftover PTO from the previous year, so we figured we should take the opportunity to get away before our schedules started to get busy again in the spring. It was sort of impromptu, but once we got the idea of spending a week alone together, relaxing by a wood stove, drinking craft beer, winter hiking, and binge-watching DVDs, we couldn't get it out of our heads. 2 weeks later, we were packed up in my father's F-150, we swapped cars, and on the road. Things got wacky immediately, but first, there are a couple of things you need to know about this location. The lake basically sits in the middle of a dead zone as far as wireless reception goes. Sometimes you can randomly get a couple bars of service, but never with regularity. The isolation and feeling of being unplugged is one main reason I love going up to the cabin. It becomes a lot easier to not glue yourself to your phone when you physically can't. Secondly, as mentioned before, this place is secluded. It's a solid 10-minute drive before cell reception kicks in with any sort of consistency, and about another 5 before you reach town. A couple of years ago, and after much debate within the family, we decided to break down and get a satellite dish installed so we would have some connection with the outside world. We essentially have basic cable for news/weather and a phone line. However, my folks have the service suspended at the start of winter since our family rarely visits during those months. So, my wife and I were heading up without a phone connection, but it had never been a problem before, so we didn't really think anything of it. It hadn't snowed too much in our area, but the ground was still covered in a few inches of old snow, and there were snowmobile tracks all over the place. Before reaching the final turnoff towards the cabin, you have to drive across a causeway, a fancy term for a land bridge, and while crossing it, you get a really good view of both sides of the lake. It had been cold for a few weeks straight, so the lake was frozen over. I looked out over the lake and saw what appeared to be 2 guys ice fishing, sitting on a picnic table out in the middle of our side of the lake. It was my neighbor's picnic table. I knew right away that it was his because of its very distinct paint job. This exact thing had actually happened before, and the last group of fishermen that did this left his table out on the ice, and it fell through once the lake started to thaw. Because of this, my neighbor had chained his new picnic table to a concrete footing on the edge of his property. So, that means these guys either broke the table to get it out on the lake, or they broke the chain. I am also pretty confident that it wasn't my neighbor out on the ice because he lives in Florida, doesn't fish, and never visits in the winter. This pissed me off. I say something along the lines of again? What the duck is their problem? To my wife, and she reciprocated in a similar fashion. Since both of us were in agreement, I sped up to get to the cabin and confront them before they could run off. I didn't really have a plan, but I figured I would go yell at them and threaten to call the cops if they didn't put it back, which I couldn't actually do. I kind of figured that as soon as they saw the truck turn down the road, they would take off anyway. I was right, but oddly more right than I knew. As I came down the road, I noticed a few things that struck me as odd. First, there were two dudes jumping onto and starting up snowmobiles that were parked in front of my neighbor's cabin. Second, the front door to the cabin was wide open, lights were on, and there was smoke coming out of the chimney. I stopped the truck about 50 feet from his driveway and watched as the two guys drove the snowmobiles out onto the lake, picked up their buddies, and sped off across the lake and into the woods. We kind of just sat there for a minute or so, dumbfounded. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but it definitely didn't feel right. I guess it was technically possible that my neighbor was visiting, or that maybe he rented his cabin out to some people, but my gut told me that wasn't the case. There were no cars in his driveway, and the guys on the snowmobiles were definitely in some sort of a hurry when we pulled up. Also, it was like 10 degrees outside, so why would they leave the door open? After snapping out of it, I parked the truck in front of our cabin and walked over to the edge of the lake. Sound travels pretty well out there, and I could hear the snowmobiles getting farther and farther away. I unlocked our cabin, threw a quick start log into the wood stove, and then my wife and I headed over to my neighbor's cabin with our dog. I called out hello? A few times, and then I tried the Scrumpster's neighbor, "Are you there?" and got nothing back. As we got closer I could clearly see that the front door was splintered and had been pried open. My wife and I had unknowingly pulled up while people were actively breaking into my neighbor's cabin. This was not an ideal way to begin a relaxing winter getaway. My family is on really good terms with my neighbor, so I went ahead and stepped inside to check it out. There was a fresh pile of wood by the stove, which was roaring, and the kitchen had some paper plates, food, empty beer cans, and cigarette butts strewn about. Nothing seemed broken or missing that I could tell, but the place was an absolute mess and reeked of cigarettes. It was as if they had just decided to help themselves and make my neighbor's cabin their own private fishing lodge for a while. There were some sleeping bags and a cooler in the living room, so it looked like they had been planning to stay for more than a day. I wasn't in the cabin for more than a minute or so, and I was careful to not touch anything. I did, however, snap a few pictures for my neighbor/the cops, and then I snuffed out the wood stove. I also decided to close the front door the best I could when I left, while wearing gloves, since we were going to have to leave to get in touch with the police and my neighbor, and I didn't want the front door left wide open. The next couple of hours were pretty bunk. We drove into town and reported the break-in to the police. After giving our report, we got in touch with my neighbor, who was understandably very upset. I did my best to assure him that things weren't too bad, all things considered, and that there would just be some cleaning up to do. I offered to do it since we were going to be up there all week, but he insisted that he wanted to see it all for himself. He was going to make plans to fly up from Florida to deal with everything as soon as he could, but asked if I could nail a couple boards across the broken door for now. The police were heading out to check out the property, blah blah blah. When we got back to our cabin, the police were already at my neighbor's checking things out. One of them came over and asked if I would walk them through everything that happened. I retold the story and ended it with something along the lines of "So I left after shutting down the stove and closed the door behind me." I got some weird looks, and then conversation went something like this. "Are you sure you closed the door? Because it was open when we got here." "Yes, I definitely closed the door." "Well, it was open, and the items you described aren't there either, the sleeping bags and the cooler aren't there. So it looks like they came back and got them." That was pretty unnerving for some reason. Why risk coming all the way back for some sleeping bags and a cooler after getting away? They couldn't have known for certain that we weren't able to call the police right away. So the cops suspected that they were watching us and came back right after we left. Or that there was someone else in the area we didn't see. I listened to the snowmobiles driving off, and they got pretty far away. They kept going until I couldn't hear them anymore, and the woods on the other side of the lake are completely untouched wilderness for a few miles. I know because I hunt turkey out there. So I think there was someone else close by watching us. My wife really liked that little bit of information, especially since only a few years ago we had basically been followed by creepers on a previous trip to our cabin. Read the first story if you want the details. The whole situation was just a giant ducking downer. After a while the cops finished up and let us know they would keep a cruiser in the area, not that that would really help, and that they were going to check on the other cabins for any signs of break-ins. I nailed my neighbor's door shut, dragged the picnic table off the ice, they had cut the chain, and headed back inside for a much-needed beer, or 3, or 4. We had debated a little bit about canceling the trip and heading back home for a staycation, but honestly we were determined to enjoy our week because we had really been looking forward to it. So we decided to stay. The next couple of days were great. We did exactly what we intended to do, which was mostly nothing. We watched movies, snuggled, and drank in excess. I made my world-famous chili, and my wife ate it. We had bacon, eggs, and mimosas for breakfast, beer, grilled cheese, and mediocre Redbox movies for lunch, and vodka tonics, hearty winter meals, and sexy times for dinner. It was awesome. Granted, every time we heard a snowmobile, we both gave each other an oh shit look, but after a few times, we were joking about it, and our oh shit looks morphed into a game of who can make the funniest face. We were just generally having a great time. As much as we were enjoying being completely overindulgent bed bunnies, by midweek we wanted to stretch our legs, so we decided to go for a hike. It was a beautiful day, and I knew the surrounding area very well, so I suggested we hike up to the dam at the mouth of the river, stream, really, that feeds the lake. It freezes over in winter and looks pretty cool. It was about a 2 to 3 hours hike round trip depending on the pace, short and sweet. We brought our dog along, and again, we were having a great time, enjoying the extremely scenic winter woods and each other's company. During our return journey, an unfortunate event occurred. About 2-ish miles, 30 minutes, from the cabin, we hear the whine of snowmobiles. We each made a funny face, joked, and then got quiet and kept listening. They were getting closer. At the time, it wasn't exactly unexpected. It was a gorgeous day out, and we were smack dab in the middle of prime snowmobile territory. But given everything that had happened earlier in the week, it was impossible to not feel a little uneasy. The snowmobiles kept getting closer, and the whine was getting louder and louder. My wife and I talked about something, but honestly I wasn't really listening to her. I can't really recall what we were discussing because I was mentally reviewing the circumstances. The engine sounds were getting louder, and it was obvious they were coming down the same trail we were on. I suppose it could have been anyone. Perhaps a father and son enjoying the day, or a couple of friends off to meet up with some of their buddies. Regardless, I just got a very bad feeling. I carry, almost as a direct result of the last weird encounter I had at the cabin. So I made the decision to unholster, rack a round into the chamber, and reholster. Just in case. Not here to debate the pros/cons of guns or carrying +1. But I do what I do and did what I did, and I feel good about it. The trail we were on was about 5 to 6 feet wide, well traveled, so once the snowmobiles came into view, I picked up our dog. He's a little guy but thinks the planet Earth is his, and the rest of us are just weird tall visitors here to grace him with treats, and then we stood off to the edge of the trail so they could pass us. I think we played it pretty standard as far as general common courtesy goes. As soon as they saw us, they both stopped in the middle of the trail, about 100 feet from where we were standing. I waved. They didn't wave back. I could see that they were talking back and forth, occasionally looking at us. They seemed to finish up their conversation and then gun their engines. Both of them started approaching us very fast and appeared to be in a line to hit us. My wife and I stepped back a few steps into the brush as they, ducking, buzzed, US, at full throttle. I'm talking inches, not feet. They continue past us for a bit and then stop and turn to look back at us. I instinctively, almost as a reflex, threw up my free arm, holding a furiously barking Boston Terrier in the other, and yelled, "What the duck is your problem?" One of them replied with a middle finger, revved the engine a few times, and then they both took off down the trail. My wife was a wreck afterwards. I was scared, but she was really scared. The trail we were on basically ends where our property begins, so if it was the same people from earlier in the week, they would know we weren't home. We had another 30 minutes of hiking before we got back, and the whole time we could hear the snowmobiles ahead of us. They didn't disappear and get farther away like before. The whole walk back they were completely within earshot. After about 10 minutes, we could hear that they had stopped and then started driving around at low RPM. The engines were running, but not at full throttle. After a few minutes, we stopped and waited. They started at full blast again, this time getting farther and farther away. We waited until we couldn't hear them again and then headed for the cabin. When we got back, there were snowmobile tracks all around the property. Out front and out back. They had been circling the cabin. We had no way to call the police, so after an extremely short and extremely tense conversation, we promptly packed up, closed up the cabin, and left for home. Vacation officially ruined. We contacted the police, but there wasn't much to say other than, a couple of assholes on snowmobiles almost ran us over and then drove all over our property. We may have been more selective with our words. The police were certainly sympathetic, and again, given the break-in at my neighbor's, they seemed pretty concerned about it. In the end there wasn't much for them to do. We gave descriptions and our info and left. The thing that gets to me the most is that even though my wife acts like it didn't bother her too much, I know it did. I have been going to that cabin my entire life, and some of the best memories I have are up there on that lake. Now, I have not only one but two terrible and frightening experiences at that cabin, where the person I love the most in this world was potentially at risk. I'd never ask her to go somewhere she doesn't feel safe, and honestly I am not sure I feel safe going up there either anymore. The good news is that both my neighbor and my family decided to have proper alarm systems installed, so at the very least someone will be alerted to any future break-in attempts. However, it still doesn't help with the fact that when you are far away from help, you are essentially at the mercy of others. I know and believe that the vast majority of people are good-natured, but I'm learning that all it takes is one person, or multiple in my case, to really ruin your day. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful day, and stay safe out there.